The courtroom was buzzing with hushed conversations, the kind that comes with a sense of anticipation, like something big was about to happen. The walls of the grand, oak-paneled room were lined with old portraits of judges from bygone eras, their serious eyes watching over the scene. The murmur of voices intensified as the bailiff called the court to order. The people in the room weren't just your everyday spectators. They were here for something huge, something that had made headlines across the country. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It wasn't every day that a case of such magnitude took place in this courthouse, but it was the presence of a single, unexpected person that had brought the attention of the media, celebrities, and tech enthusiasts alike. Elon Musk, the billionaire tech mogul, founder of SpaceX, Tesla, and countless other ventures, was seated quietly in the back row of the courtroom, his face betraying little emotion. Most people in the room thought he was just there for publicity. After all, why would someone like him need to be involved in a legal battle? Was he there to stir up drama, or maybe just watch from the sidelines? But then, as the case began, something strange happened. The judge, a tall, imposing figure with a permanent frown etched across his face, glanced over at Musk and with a slight chuckle, muttered to the courtroom, "Well, I guess we'll see if our Silicon Valley friend has any insight to offer, huh?" The room, initially filled with murmurs, now buzzed with laughter. The judge's tone was playful, mocking even, as he looked at Musk in disbelief. There was no way someone like him, who spent his days launching rockets and revolutionizing the electric car industry, could have any interest in a lowly legal case, let alone any legal expertise. But Musk didn't flinch. His face remained impassive, his eyes hidden behind the dark lenses of his sunglasses. He was used to people doubting him, mocking him. It wasn't the first time. In fact, he thrived on being underestimated. A few minutes passed. The bailiff began reading out the details of the case. It was a high-profile corporate lawsuit involving a massive tech conglomerate, a shady patent infringement accusation, and a potentially huge payout. The room was tense, the stakes high. The defense had no real star power, no big legal names attached to it. But that's when things started to get interesting. As the prosecutor, a sharp, well-dressed woman with a no-nonsense attitude, made her opening arguments, Musk sat back, his fingers lightly tapping against his leg. From the moment she began speaking, it was clear that something didn't sit right with him. The prosecutor's case was full of holes, flawed reasoning, weak evidence, and a glaringly obvious bias in the way she presented her facts. Musk was a man of precision, detail, and innovation. He didn't miss things like this. Without warning, the judge raised his hand. "Mr. Musk, I'm sure you have a comment," he said sarcastically, clearly not expecting any real input from the tech giant. The courtroom fell silent. Eyes turned toward Musk, waiting to see how he would respond. Some expected him to stand up, make a joke, or maybe just shrug it off and let the case proceed. But that's not what happened. Musk stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. He adjusted his sunglasses, then turned to face the judge. "I believe the evidence is being misinterpreted," he said, his voice calm but carrying a sharpness that immediately grabbed the attention of everyone in the room. "The patent isn't as clear-cut as it seems, and if you take a closer look, you'll find that the claims against my client are based on a faulty understanding of the technology involved." The judge blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected statement. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The prosecutor, who had been riding high on the strength of her opening arguments, raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Musk, you seem to be under the impression that this is your arena. Are you a lawyer? Or are you just here to cause a scene?" The crowd was silent as all eyes turned to Musk. He didn't flinch. "I'm not a lawyer," he replied coolly, "but I've read the case thoroughly, and I've studied the technology in question. You're missing key details, and that will come back to haunt you." A ripple of surprise spread through the courtroom. Musk wasn't just talking about tech, he was talking about legal strategy. And he was doing it with the kind of confidence that most seasoned lawyers couldn't muster, let alone a billionaire businessman known for launching rockets into space. Judge Thompson snorted in disbelief. "Well, I'm sure you've got a lot of insight into rocket science, Mr. Musk, but this is a court of law, not a science fair. The audience chuckled. Musk remained silent, but his eyes gleamed with something that couldn't be mistaken for arrogance. It was a quiet certainty, an underlying confidence that no one had expected from the tech mogul. And so, the trial proceeded, but something had changed. The energy in the room was different now. What was initially seen as an intrusion by Musk, a curious but irrelevant presence, was now becoming the focal point of the entire case. His calm demeanor, coupled with his sharp observations, suggested he was more than just a billionaire tech entrepreneur. What was Musk really doing here? Was he simply a spectator, or was there something more to this story? As the trial continued, one thing became increasingly clear. The courtroom drama had only just begun, and Elon Musk had just thrown a wrench into the gears of what was supposed to be a straightforward legal battle. Elon Musk wasn't always the name that made headlines around the world. For most of his life, he was simply the quiet, curious boy who spent countless hours reading books and asking questions. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, on June 28, 1971, Elon was the son of a Canadian mother and a South African father, both highly intelligent in their own right. His mother, May, was a dietitian and a model. His father, Errol, an electromechanical engineer. From an early age, Elon was fascinated by the world around him. As a child, he was always a little different. While other kids played outside, Musk was absorbed in books about science, technology, and engineering. By the age of 12, he had taught himself programming and created his first video game, Blaster, which he sold to a magazine for $500. It was just the beginning of a mind that saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Musk's brilliance was often overshadowed by his strange, introverted demeanor. He was bullied in school, and his social awkwardness made him a target for others. Yet, he didn't let that stop him. In his early teens, Elon moved to Canada to live with his mother. He attended Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, where he spent 2 years before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania. There, he earned degrees in both physics and economics, 2 fields that would come to define his later ventures. Despite his academic success, Musk was always on the lookout for something more. It wasn't enough to merely understand the world. He wanted to change it. That drive would eventually lead him to Silicon Valley, where his entrepreneurial journey began in earnest. After dropping out of Stanford University after just 2 days to pursue a career in business, Musk co-founded Zip2, a software company that provided business directories and maps for newspapers. It was sold for nearly $300 million. But rather than rest on his newfound wealth, Musk launched X.com, an online payment company that later became PayPal. When PayPal was sold to eBay for $1.5 billion, Musk's fortunes truly skyrocketed. It was with this money that he began to set his sights on the impossible: space travel. He founded SpaceX in 2002 with the goal of reducing the cost of space exploration and making human life multiplanetary. He also took the helm of Tesla Motors, where he would push the boundaries of electric vehicles and renewable energy. Over the years, Musk would be credited with transforming entire industries, from automotive to aerospace to energy. But what many people didn't know about Elon Musk was his hidden talent, a passion for law. Unlike most billionaires, Musk had spent years studying the legal system, not just for his business ventures, but out of personal interest. His fascination with the law had begun early in his life. Growing up, he had witnessed firsthand how people's lives were affected by legal battles. He read books on legal history and philosophy, and eventually, he began to take an active interest in the way legal systems interacted with business. Musk even went as far as to take law courses online, though he never earned a degree in it. Still, Musk's understanding of legal matters was on par with some of the top lawyers in the country. His approach was methodical and strategic, much like his approach to engineering and business. It wasn't just about knowing the law, it was about understanding how to use it to your advantage and how to recognize patterns that others couldn't see. This hidden talent was a part of him few knew about. To the public, he was simply the genius behind Tesla and SpaceX, the billionaire businessman with a flair for disruption. But beneath that persona was a mind that saw the world through the lens of logic and reason, able to break down complex issues and find creative solutions. And so, when he appeared in that courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, judges, and defendants, it wasn't just the tech mogul sitting there. It was the hidden legal genius, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As the case unfolded, Musk's knowledge of both the technology involved and the intricacies of the law made him a force to be reckoned with. People began to wonder, how much did they really know about this enigmatic billionaire? Was his expertise in business and technology the only thing that made him remarkable, or was there more to this story than they could have ever imagined? The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the courtroom, casting a golden light that bathed the polished floors and the rows of wooden benches. The spectators, media representatives, corporate executives, and curious onlookers had all taken their seats. The case, the latest to capture the public's imagination, was about to begin. The defendant, a mid-sized tech company accused of patent infringement, was facing a tough uphill battle, with its legal team struggling to keep up with the sharp tactics of the prosecution. In the back of the room, far from the spotlight, Elon Musk sat quietly, his gaze focused on the proceedings with an intensity that few could understand. His presence wasn't exactly a secret. He was Elon Musk, after all, but it seemed almost surreal to see him in a setting like this. A courtroom filled with the usual tension and drama, yet there he was, a billionaire businessman who had revolutionized industries, watching intently. Despite the whispers from the crowd and the occasional glances directed his way, Musk remained calm. He wasn't here to draw attention, at least not in the way people thought. The real story, the one no one knew yet, was about to unfold. The judge, Judge Thompson, a middle-aged man with a stern expression and a reputation for a no-nonsense approach, entered the room, and the court fell into silence. The gavel came down, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor, a polished woman in her 40s named Rachel Donovan, stood up to deliver her opening statement. She was confident, sharp, and articulate, easily commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Donovan had a reputation for winning difficult cases, and her performance today only solidified her status as a formidable force in the courtroom. "We are here today to prove that the defendant has flagrantly violated patent law," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "The evidence will show that this company knowingly used proprietary technology without proper licensing, causing damages to my client, the rightful owner of the patents in question." Donovan's arguments were solid on the surface. She highlighted the strength of her client's intellectual property portfolio and pointed to what she believed were undeniable flaws in the defendant's defense. Musk's attention never wavered. He watched her every move, his mind working furiously to connect the dots. She was good, but something about her strategy didn't sit right with him. As the prosecutor continued, Musk's fingers tapped rhythmically against his thigh, a habit he had when deep in thought. He had seen similar cases before, and this one, on the surface, seemed straightforward. But the cracks were beginning to show. Donovan's case was full of assumptions. She hadn't even scratched the surface of the underlying technological issue, something Musk was all too familiar with. The defense, however, was struggling. Their lawyer, a man named Gregory Fields, appeared out of his depth. Fields had once been a promising litigator, but this case was bigger than he could handle. His arguments were weak, and he was clearly outmatched by the aggressive prosecutor. Fields stumbled through his own opening statement, his voice faltering as he tried to establish doubt about the validity of the plaintiff's claims. And then, just as the defense was about to proceed with presenting its first witness, Musk did something unexpected. He stood up. The room went still. Everyone turned toward him, unsure of what to expect. Judge Thompson's eyes narrowed, his gaze moving from Musk to his papers. The judge had already mocked Musk earlier, dismissing his presence as a mere distraction. He had little patience for people who didn't respect the decorum of the court. "Mr. Musk, if you have something to say, please make it quick," Judge Thompson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The audience held its breath. Was Musk about to speak out of turn? Was he about to make a fool of himself? But Musk didn't hesitate. "I believe the prosecution has overlooked a key piece of evidence," he said calmly. "There's a flaw in the patent claim itself, an inconsistency in the timing of the original filing that calls into question the validity of the entire case." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Musk, I'm sure you're very well versed in technology. But this is a courtroom, not a tech conference. Unless you are here to present legal evidence, I suggest you leave the speaking to the lawyers." Musk didn't flinch. He wasn't about to back down now. Instead, he continued, I'm not a lawyer, but I have thoroughly reviewed the case. And I'm telling you, if you look at the timeline closely, you'll see that the patent in question was filed under questionable circumstances. It's a small detail, but it could change the entire outcome of this case. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor, Rachel Donovan, was momentarily taken aback. She hadn't expected Musk to speak up, let alone challenge her arguments so directly. I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Musk, Donovan said, regaining her composure. The evidence is clear. There's no ambiguity here. But Musk wasn't done. I've worked in industries where precision is everything. If you're building a rocket to take people to Mars, every detail matters. And the same applies here. One small error, one tiny inconsistency in a patent filing can undermine an entire case. Judge Thompson, who had been listening intently, sighed. I will not tolerate any further disruptions, Mr. Musk. If you wish to make a formal statement, you may do so through your legal counsel. Musk's eyes briefly met the judge's before he sat down again. His expression remained unchanged, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The courtroom was abuzz. Some of the observers in the gallery whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued by Musk's unusual intervention. But others, particularly those who didn't know Musk's full background, still assumed he was just another billionaire who had walked into the wrong place at the wrong time. They didn't know how wrong they were. As the trial continued, Musk's quiet observation was now coupled with a growing sense of purpose. He wasn't just there as a bystander. Musk had come to this courtroom with a reason, a purpose that would soon become clear to everyone in the room. The case, which had seemed like any other legal battle, was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The courtroom was tense, with the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was Musk just a billionaire trying to assert himself, or was there something more to his sudden involvement? Despite the judge's dismissive tone, the ripple he caused with his brief intervention had yet to settle. Most of the spectators exchanged glances, curious to see whether Musk's claim about the patent would lead anywhere, or whether it would simply be dismissed as the ramblings of a man who didn't belong in a legal setting. The trial resumed, with the defense team scrambling to recover from their earlier disarray. Gregory Fields, the lead defense lawyer, had stumbled through his opening statements, but Musk's unexpected insight had at least given him a brief moment of pause. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in the details Musk had noticed that they'd overlooked. Fields stood up, his movements stiff, trying to regain control of the room. We'll be calling our first witness now, Fields said, his voice carrying more authority than it had before. Dr. Jennifer Sykes, a leading expert in patent law, will be able to provide critical context on the validity of the patent in question. As the witness took the stand, all eyes in the room were on her. Dr. Sykes was a highly respected intellectual property attorney with decades of experience in the tech world. She was poised, confident, and clearly prepared to dismantle the prosecution's case. The prosecution had been strong in its opening arguments, but Dr. Sykes' expertise brought a sense of balance to the defense's side. Her detailed analysis of patent law and her calm demeanor had already begun to shift the momentum in their favor. But Elon Musk wasn't looking at her. He was looking at something else entirely. His mind was racing, as it often did when he was presented with a challenge. He wasn't just concerned with the legal technicalities, he was thinking about the bigger picture. He'd seen this before, in the cutthroat world of business. A powerful company, using its patent portfolio to claim ownership over technology that wasn't truly theirs. He'd seen how the legal system could be manipulated to serve the interests of the powerful, with little regard for justice or fairness. Musk's thoughts drifted back to his own experiences with patents. His own company, Tesla, had been involved in patent wars over electric vehicle technology. SpaceX, too, had its share of legal battles, particularly with government agencies and large aerospace contractors. But he'd always fought those battles on his own terms, applying his sharp, analytical mind to outmaneuver the competition. That was exactly what he was doing here now, outmaneuvering the legal system, using his ability to see patterns others couldn't. The prosecutor, Rachel Donovan, was good, but she lacked the deeper understanding of the technical issues at play. Dr. Sykes was skilled, but even she didn't fully grasp the implications of the patent details Musk had uncovered. As Dr. Sykes spoke, Musk's mind went to work. He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and began scribbling down notes, mapping out the case in his mind. The timing of the patent, the claims being made, the background of the original inventors, it was all coming together in a way that could expose the true nature of the case. It was at that moment that he realized something crucial. This trial wasn't just about the technology being contested. It was about something much bigger, the system itself. The system that could be manipulated, twisted, and turned to serve those with the right connections. Musk had seen it before, but he wasn't going to let it happen here. When Dr. Sykes finished her testimony, the prosecutor stood up, ready for cross-examination. Rachel Donovan wasn't one to back down, but something in her demeanor had changed. She no longer seemed as confident as she had before. Musk had disrupted her flow, and she knew it. Her eyes flicked over to him briefly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and irritation. She dismissed him earlier, but now she had to consider the possibility that he might be more than just a spectator. Donovan began her line of questioning, carefully probing the credibility of Dr. Sykes' testimony. But Musk wasn't listening to her. His attention was on the evidence in front of him, more specifically, the timeline of events that Dr. Sykes had laid out in her testimony. The defense was trying to use technical jargon to confuse the matter, but Musk's mind was sharper than any of them realized. He could see past the distractions, cutting through the noise to find the truth. After a few tense minutes, Musk stood up once more, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Your Honor," Musk said, his calm tone contrasting with the building tension. "I believe there's an issue with the timeline Dr. Sykes presented. I've just noticed something that warrants further examination." Judge Thompson looked up at Musk, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Musk," he said, clearly exasperated, "I've already warned you once about speaking out of turn. If you have something to add, you'd better be prepared to back it up." Musk didn't hesitate. The patent was filed in a time frame that contradicts the claim being made. The supposed invention in question was already in the public domain long before the patent was filed. The timeline itself is flawed. A few gasps echoed through the room. Donovan's expression shifted, but she quickly regained control. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Musk," she said, clearly unwilling to give an inch. "Are you claiming that our client's patent is invalid?" "I'm not claiming anything yet," Musk replied smoothly, "but I think the court should take a closer look at the evidence. It's possible the patent was filed after the technology was already in the public domain, making it invalid. And if that's the case, then we're dealing with an entirely different matter." Judge Thompson hesitated, his face showing the first sign of doubt. The room fell into a heavy silence as the implications of Musk's words sank in. Was it possible? Could this entire case be based on faulty premises? "All right," the judge finally said, after a long pause. "We will take a brief recess. Mr. Musk, I expect you to present your findings to the court when we reconvene." As the court adjourned, the spectators began whispering among themselves. Musk had once again turned the tide, his quiet intervention now opening the door for a whole new angle to the case. For the first time in the trial, the air was thick with uncertainty. No one knew where this would lead, but one thing was clear. Elon Musk was not just a businessman anymore. He was a player in this legal drama, and he wasn't about to let anyone underestimate him. The brief recess had given everyone a moment to collect their thoughts, but the energy in the courtroom was anything but calm. The usual hum of low conversations filled the air, with eyes flicking toward Elon Musk, who was seated at the back of the room, his expression unreadable. People couldn't quite wrap their heads around what had just happened. The billionaire tech mogul, known for transforming entire industries, had just stepped into the legal ring and landed a punch that no one had seen coming. The question now was, how far would he go with it? Judge Thompson's gavel hit the desk, calling the court back to order. The murmurs in the gallery slowly faded as everyone returned to their seats. All eyes were now on Musk, waiting to see if his earlier claim about the patent's timeline would hold any weight. Musk hadn't spoken much during the recess, but his mind had been racing. He'd already gathered his thoughts and reviewed the evidence that had been presented. The more he looked at the patent in question, the more he became convinced that there was something off about the timeline. It wasn't just a minor inconsistency. If he was right, this could fundamentally unravel the entire case. He wasn't here to play games. Musk had long since proven that he didn't back down when he saw something that needed to be fixed. The legal world wasn't different from the tech world. It was about finding the weak spots and exploiting them. What people didn't realize, though, was that Musk had something that very few others in this courtroom had: a sharp, analytical mind that could dissect complex problems in a way that most lawyers couldn't. As the court reconvened, Musk stood up once again, his movement deliberate. His presence commanded attention, and even the judge, who had been irritated by him earlier, couldn't help but take notice. "I've reviewed the patent again, and I believe there are more irregularities than just the timeline," Musk said, his voice calm but firm. "In fact, the technology described in this patent appears to be based on concepts that were publicly available well before the filing date. Specifically, there is prior art in this field that predates the patent, which makes it questionable whether the plaintiff has the right to claim ownership of it." A hush fell over the room. No one had expected Musk to come back with such a bold statement. The entire case now seemed to be teetering on the edge of collapse. Rachel Donovan, the prosecutor, stood up quickly, her face flushed with frustration. "Your Honor," she began, "Mr. Musk's statement is purely speculative. He is not a legal expert, and his assertions are based on nothing more than his own interpretation of the facts. This is a blatant attempt to derail the trial." Musk didn't flinch. "I may not be a lawyer, but I know enough about innovation to recognize when something is being claimed as original when it isn't," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The patent in question borrows heavily from publicly available technology. I've worked in fields where patents mean everything, where the line between true innovation and exploitation is razor thin." Judge Thompson looked between Musk and Donovan, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Musk, you are not a party in this case. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I must remind you that you are not here to act as a counsel. I suggest you leave the legal arguments to those who are qualified." "I understand, Your Honor," Musk replied, standing tall, "but I would like to formally request that the court consider the evidence I've brought forward. If we are to proceed, we need to establish whether this patent was filed in good faith or whether it's an attempt to monopolize technology that was already in the public domain." The room was silent as everyone waited for the judge's ruling. For the first time in the trial, Judge Thompson seemed unsure of how to proceed. This wasn't the usual case of an overconfident billionaire trying to overshadow the professionals. Musk's observations had struck a nerve, and the possibility of a legal misstep was too big to ignore. After a long pause, Judge Thompson sighed, clearly irritated. "Fine," he said, his voice firm. "Mr. Musk, you may submit your evidence. But I expect this to be done through proper channels and not through a public spectacle." Musk nodded. He wasn't looking for a spectacle. He was looking for justice. He had no intention of making this about himself, but he also knew that if the system was flawed, it was his responsibility to point it out. He was no stranger to battling powerful systems, and this one, despite its formality, was no different. "I will have my legal team submit the evidence immediately," Musk said, sitting down. He wasn't just confident, he was certain. The case was now on a completely different track, one where his sharp eye for detail could shift the balance of power. As the court continued, Musk's mind continued to work. He wasn't in this to take over the case or to overshadow anyone, but he knew that there was a deeper problem at play. This wasn't just a fight over patents, it was a fight over the future. If companies could manipulate the legal system to claim technology that didn't belong to them, it could have a ripple effect on the entire tech industry. And that wasn't something he was going to allow to happen. Meanwhile, Rachel Donovan and the rest of the prosecution team were seething. They had been confident, expecting an easy victory. But now, they were forced to contend with a player who wasn't just a businessman. He was a strategist, someone who had spent years navigating the high-stakes world of technology and innovation. For the first time, the prosecution had to question whether they had underestimated their opponent. Musk wasn't just here to support the defense. He was here to take down the entire premise of the case. And the longer the trial went on, the more it seemed like that might just happen. As the court reconvened, the air was thick with anticipation. Elon Musk had thrown a wrench into the gears of the prosecution's carefully orchestrated case, and now, all eyes were on the defense as they prepared to submit the evidence Musk had uncovered. The courtroom had shifted from a typical legal drama to something far more intense, a high-stakes battle of intellect, strategy, and determination. Judge Thompson banged his gavel, signaling the resumption of the trial. "Mr. Musk, your evidence has been submitted through proper channels, as you requested. I expect you to adhere to the rules and refrain from making any more public statements unless called upon by your legal counsel." Musk nodded respectfully, his demeanor calm, almost detached. His role in this case had always been to observe, to offer his insights, and to make sure that the truth came to light. It wasn't about ego. It was about uncovering the layers of deception hidden beneath the surface. On the other side of the courtroom, Rachel Donovan, the prosecutor, was visibly frustrated. Her composure had been shaken, but she was determined to maintain control of the situation. This was no ordinary case, and Musk's unexpected intervention had put her on the defensive. She had built her entire case on the strength of the plaintiff's patent, but now she was forced to contend with Musk's new allegations. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about saving face. "Your Honor," Donovan began, standing up with an air of authority that hadn't been there before, "we must address the matter at hand. Mr. Musk's claims, while interesting, are based on speculation. He's not a legal expert, and his opinion on patent law should not be treated as fact." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had already been forced to acknowledge Musk's contributions, and it was clear that Donovan's words were beginning to fall flat. "I agree, Your Honor," Donovan continued, now shifting to a more defensive tone. "This is a diversion, a tactic to discredit the real issue. The evidence presented by the plaintiff is clear, and we will continue to focus on the facts. The defense would do well to remember that the court is here to examine the truth, not to entertain outside opinions." Musk sat back, listening intently. He wasn't concerned with Donovan's attempts to undermine him. He had expected it. What mattered now was how the defense would respond, and whether they could bring the full weight of their findings to the table. Gregory Fields, the defense attorney, stood up, his voice hesitant but firm. "Your Honor, I would like to submit the findings that Mr. Musk has shared with us. We've had our team look into the details of the patent and the timeline. There is indeed a discrepancy, one that calls into question the validity of the entire claim." As Fields spoke, Musk could see that the defense team had mobilized quickly in response to his initial intervention. The evidence he'd uncovered was now being presented in a way that could potentially shift the momentum of the trial entirely. Judge Thompson nodded, signaling for the defense to proceed. He was clearly aware that the case had taken a surprising turn, but as a judge, he had no choice but to allow the defense to present their findings. The ball was now in the court's hands. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as the defense team introduced a series of documents. These included records of the original patent filing, evidence of prior art, and a timeline showing that the patent in question had been filed after technology that was remarkably similar had already entered the public domain. The room was captivated, each person hanging on to every detail as the evidence began to unfold. Dr. Jennifer Sykes, the intellectual property expert who had testified earlier, was brought back to the stand. Her calm and collected demeanor now seemed more fitting, as she had been thoroughly briefed on the new evidence that Musk had pointed out. With precision, she explained how the patent filing in question had numerous irregularities, particularly in the documentation surrounding the claimed invention. "There are significant gaps in the timeline," Dr. Sykes stated, her voice steady. "The technology described in this patent closely mirrors publicly available research and products. The filing date suggests that the technology may have been in use long before the patent was submitted, raising doubts about the originality of the invention." Donovan's face tightened. She had hoped to dismiss these claims as baseless, but now, with an expert witness supporting Musk's findings, her options were limited. She stood up, her eyes flashing with resolve. "Dr. Sykes," she said, addressing the witness with a cool tone, "are you suggesting that the plaintiff's patent is fraudulent?" Dr. Sykes paused, choosing her words carefully. "Fraudulent may be too strong of a term, but I am suggesting that the patent was filed under questionable circumstances. Whether that constitutes fraud is for the court to decide." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The idea that a major corporation might be engaging in a legal loophole to claim ownership of something that wasn't truly theirs was a disturbing thought. Musk had essentially turned this trial on its head, and the prosecution was struggling to keep up. Rachel Donovan's expression hardened as she realized that the tides were turning. "Your Honor, we request a short recess to review the newly introduced evidence. We need to prepare for cross-examination of Dr. Sykes." Judge Thompson nodded. "We will adjourn for a brief recess. This case is becoming more complicated by the minute, and we must ensure that all parties have time to examine the evidence thoroughly." As the courtroom emptied out for the recess, the whispers in the hallways were louder than ever. Musk had brought the focus of the trial back to what truly mattered: the validity of the patent and the possibility that an entire case could be built on false pretenses. The defense, with Musk's help, had found the cracks in the system, and now they were exploiting them. Elon Musk stood in the back of the courtroom, his arms crossed, looking more determined than ever. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sending a message. If he could expose the truth here, it would send ripples through the entire legal system. No one would ever underestimate him again, not in a courtroom or in the boardroom. The recess was short but crucial. During the break, the legal teams were in constant motion, scrambling to analyze the new evidence that had emerged and strategizing for the next phase of the trial. Musk, however, remained calm. His role was never to dominate the courtroom. Rather, he was the catalyst, a disruptor, uncovering flaws in the system that others had missed. As the judge called the court back into session, the atmosphere was charged with an intensity that hadn't been present before. Everyone knew this trial had taken an unexpected turn. What had begun as a routine patent dispute was now shaping up to be a much larger conversation about the integrity of the system itself. Musk had pulled back the curtain, exposing cracks in the case, and now it was anyone's game. "Order in the court," Judge Thompson's voice rang out, his gavel striking the desk with a decisive thud. The room fell silent as everyone returned to their seats. "Mr. Fields, I understand you have additional information to present." Gregory Fields, the defense attorney, stood up, his face a mix of determination and apprehension. He had seen firsthand the impact of Musk's intervention, and now it was his job to leverage that momentum. "Your Honor, thank you. As we've reviewed the evidence that Mr. Musk provided, we believe there is more to this case than initially presented. It is clear that the patent filed by the plaintiff is not only based on prior art, but it may also involve deliberate attempts to circumvent intellectual property law." The words hung in the air. The idea that a major corporation, one with vast legal resources, could be engaged in such deceptive practices was chilling. It wasn't just a mistake. It was potentially a calculated attempt to monopolize technology that had already been made public. Fields continued, "We have reason to believe that the patent in question is not an isolated incident. There may be a pattern of behavior here, where patents are filed to lock down technologies that were never truly original to begin with." Musk, seated at the back of the courtroom, allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was exactly what he had been thinking all along. The larger issue at hand wasn't just the patent itself. It was the way the patent system was being manipulated to stifle innovation and control entire industries. The judge took a moment to absorb Fields' statement before responding. "This is a serious allegation, Mr. Fields. You're suggesting that there is a pattern of fraudulent activity in the plaintiff's patent filings?" "We are suggesting that the evidence points in that direction, Your Honor," Fields replied. "We're asking for a deeper investigation into the plaintiff's patent portfolio to determine whether this is an isolated case or part of a larger issue." The prosecutor, Rachel Donovan, stood up quickly, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is baseless. The defense is attempting to muddy the waters by introducing allegations that have no bearing on this case. We are here to discuss a single patent, not to launch an investigation into the plaintiff's entire portfolio." Judge Thompson looked between the two sides, clearly torn. He had to make a decision, whether to allow the case to remain focused on the singular patent dispute or whether to broaden the scope and risk derailing the entire trial. "I am inclined to agree with the defense," Judge Thompson said after a long pause, his tone grave. "If there is indeed a pattern at play, it is in the interest of justice to investigate further. This case will proceed with a focus on the validity of the patent in question, but I will allow the defense to explore these new developments." The prosecution was stunned into silence. They had expected to control the narrative, but now the judge had opened the door to an entirely new line of inquiry. Musk's earlier observations had not only forced the court to consider the legitimacy of the patent, but they had also exposed a potentially much larger issue, one that could have profound implications for the entire tech industry. The defense team quickly went into action. Dr. Sykes, the patent expert, was called back to the stand to further explain her findings. She outlined in meticulous detail how the patent's claims were either too broad or too similar to existing technologies, and she highlighted several other patents within the plaintiff's portfolio that appear to be based on the same questionable practices. With each passing minute, the prosecution's case seemed to crumble under the weight of the defense's evidence. Donovan, who had been so confident in her opening arguments, now found herself on the back foot, struggling to keep up with the pace of the trial. As Dr. Sykes wrapped up her testimony, Fields turned to Musk. "Mr. Musk," he said, "would you like to present your thoughts on the matter? You've done an incredible job bringing this issue to light, and we would value your input as we move forward." The courtroom went quiet. Musk's involvement had always been peripheral up until now, but with the tide turning in favor of the defense, his insights had become invaluable. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket, and walked toward the front of the courtroom. The audience seemed to hold their breath as the once-dismissed billionaire took center stage. Musk cleared his throat before speaking. "I'm not a lawyer, as I've said, but I've spent most of my life working with technology, and I've seen firsthand how easily systems can be manipulated. The patent system is no different. We've reached a point where patents are used not to protect true innovation, but to block competition and monopolize industries. This case is about more than just one patent. It's about whether we allow a system built on trust to be hijacked by those who seek to exploit it for their own gain." His words carried weight. The room was silent as the audience absorbed the gravity of his statement. This wasn't just about legal tactics. This was a call to action, a plea for the court to recognize the larger issues at play. Musk's voice softened slightly. "If we don't fix this now, if we don't challenge the misuse of patent law, we'll see more and more innovation stifled, and more small companies pushed out by those who can afford to exploit the system. That's not just bad for business, it's bad for everyone." Judge Thompson, though maintaining his composure, seemed visibly moved. He knew Musk was right, but the question remained. Could the court act on such a broad and complex issue? Could they set a precedent that would change the way patents were handled moving forward? "I believe we've reached a critical juncture in this trial," the judge finally said. "We will take a recess to allow the parties to review the new evidence and formulate their next steps. This case is no longer just about the validity of one patent. It's about the integrity of the entire patent system." As the court adjourned, the tension in the room was palpable. Musk had effectively opened a Pandora's box, and the implications of his words would be felt long after the trial ended. Whether or not the case would be won or lost, one thing was certain: Elon Musk had changed the game. The recess was brief, but in that short span of time, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Musk's words had left an indelible mark, and the weight of his argument seemed to linger in the air. Everyone knew the stakes had been raised. What had initially seemed like a routine patent dispute was now a much larger conversation about the very fabric of the legal system that governed technological innovation. As the jury filed back into the room and the spectators resumed their seats, it was clear that the entire trial had taken on new dimensions. No longer was this simply a matter of proving who owned the rights to a particular invention. Now, it was about the ethical and legal implications of patent law itself. Could an entire industry be built on questionable patents? Was the system itself flawed? Musk had introduced a fundamental question that would echo far beyond this courtroom. Judge Thompson, still appearing contemplative from Musk's earlier remarks, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "I've given some thought to the comments made by Mr. Musk, as well as the evidence presented by the defense. This case is now more than just a simple legal dispute. It has broader implications. We are adjourned for the day, and tomorrow we will continue with testimony. I expect both sides to be prepared to address the new direction of this case." The gavel came down with finality, and the room buzzed with whispers. The prosecution, caught off guard by Musk's intervention, looked shell-shocked. The defense, on the other hand, had regained their footing. Fields shot Musk a brief nod of acknowledgement from across the room. Musk, ever the strategist, gave a small, knowing smile in return. It wasn't about personal victory. It was about getting the truth out into the open. As the court emptied, the legal teams gathered in their respective corners, deep in discussion. The defense seemed emboldened, while the prosecution appeared increasingly cornered. Donovan, despite her usual poise, could not hide the frustration that had overtaken her. She had underestimated Musk, had dismissed him as an outsider, but now she was forced to confront the reality that Musk's insights might just alter the course of the case. "Do you really think this is going to work?" one of her colleagues asked her in a low voice. "Musk is playing the long game, and he's playing it well." "I don't care how well he plays his hand," Donovan snapped, her voice tight with tension. "This is still our case to win. We just need to get back to the facts. The public perception might be swayed by his grandstanding, but we can still make our case. We have experts. We have evidence. And we'll make sure we use every single one of them to put him back in his place." But deep down, Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that the landscape had shifted under her feet. Musk was no longer just a tech mogul in the background. He was a force to be reckoned with, and she had to figure out how to adapt. On the other side, Fields and the defense team gathered around a conference table. The mood was far more relaxed, though they knew the fight was far from over. They had made some significant progress, but they needed to maintain their momentum. "Mr. Musk, I have to admit, I didn't think you'd have such a profound impact," Fields said, his tone appreciative but still somewhat cautious. "This is a whole new ballgame now. We're not just fighting a patent dispute. We're challenging a whole system." Musk gave a small, almost rueful smile. "Sometimes, the system needs to be challenged. We all know that, especially those of us who've had to fight against the status quo." Dr. Sykes, who had been the key witness in highlighting the patent's discrepancies, chimed in, "But we can't just rely on Musk's findings. We need more. We need to dig deeper into their patent portfolio, and we need to make sure we have all the angles covered. This is about setting a precedent. If we don't show that this kind of manipulation is widespread, then it won't matter." Musk nodded in agreement. "Exactly. The goal isn't just to win this case. It's to ensure that this doesn't keep happening. The system is broken, and I'm not going to let this pass unnoticed." Meanwhile, across the hall in the prosecution's war room, Donovan was recalibrating. She had been caught off guard, yes, but she wasn't out of options yet. The case wasn't lost, not by a long shot. She had a plan, and she would make sure that Musk didn't derail the entire case with his sudden interference. "I need you to prepare a counter to Dr. Sykes' testimony," she told one of her legal aides. "We're not just going to sit back and let Musk take over this case. We'll bring in our own experts, show the court that these so-called irregularities are just a distraction, and if we have to, we'll tear down every last bit of their defense." Her voice was tight with determination, but underneath, there was a flicker of doubt. Donovan knew that the defense had a compelling argument, and Musk had forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, even the most polished legal arguments could be undone by a single revelation. And right now, Musk's revelation was shaking the very foundation of the case. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed again as the defense prepared for the next round of testimony. It was clear that the prosecution had come back with a renewed sense of urgency, but the defense team had no intention of backing down. Musk had given them a chance, and now it was time to seize it. Judge Thompson called the room to order once more. As the proceedings began, the atmosphere felt different. The stakes had been raised, and the legal battle was no longer about just proving ownership of a patent. It was about whether the law could evolve and protect the true spirit of innovation, or whether it would remain a tool for exploitation by the wealthy and powerful. Musk sat quietly in the back, watching as the courtroom drama unfolded. He had made his mark. Now, it was up to the system to decide whether it would bend or break under the pressure of truth. The morning session began with a palpable sense of tension in the air. Judge Thompson's gavel echoed through the courtroom, signaling the start of what was quickly becoming a landmark trial. There was no turning back now. Both sides knew the game had changed. The focus had shifted from a typical legal dispute over intellectual property to a battle that could potentially reshape how patents were handled in the future. Musk, sitting at the back of the courtroom, looked on with quiet resolve. He wasn't one to revel in the spotlight, but he had set the stage for something bigger than this trial. The idea that the system might be flawed, deeply flawed, was now in the air. His involvement in the case had already started to spark conversations among legal experts and tech innovators alike. Whether he won or lost, the conversation around patent law had already begun to evolve, and that, to Musk, was the true victory. Judge Thompson opened the proceedings with his usual formality, though the undercurrent of tension between the prosecution and defense was palpable. We will continue today's hearing with the prosecution's rebuttal to the evidence presented by the defense. Ms. Donovan, I trust you have prepared your response. Rachel Donovan stood up, her posture straighter than usual. There was no denying the impact Musk had made in the last few days, and she knew her team needed to act quickly. She had lost some ground, but she was not about to let this case slip away. Your Honor, while the defense has introduced some intriguing points, they have misrepresented the facts, and we intend to prove that these so-called discrepancies are simply the result of oversight or misinterpretation. The plaintiff's patent stands on solid ground, and the allegations presented by the defense are nothing more than distractions. Her voice was firm, but there was an edge to it, betraying her frustration. She had no doubt the case was now far more complicated than she'd ever anticipated. However, she believed the jury was still on her side. If she could just reassert control, everything could fall back into place. Donovan turned her attention to the expert witness they had called to counter Dr. Sykes' testimony, the same expert who had been brought in at the start of the trial. He was a seasoned patent attorney with decades of experience in intellectual property law. Dr. Samuel Richards, she began, is one of the leading experts in this field. His opinion is that the patent in question is valid, and there is no evidence to suggest any intentional misrepresentation. In fact, our analysis shows that the timing of the patent filing is perfectly within legal parameters, and there is no reason to doubt the originality of the plaintiff's invention. Dr. Richards, a silver-haired man in his late 60s, rose from his seat and made his way to the witness stand. He gave a polite nod to the judge before turning to the defense. Dr. Richards, could you explain your analysis of the patent in question? Donovan asked. Certainly, he replied, his voice calm and confident. After reviewing all relevant documentation, including the patent's filing history and prior art, I found no evidence of infringement or intentional manipulation. The claims made in the patent are based on legitimate technological advances, and the timing of the filing is entirely consistent with standard industry practices. The defense team sat quietly, knowing that this expert witness could be a pivotal moment in the trial. However, Fields was ready. He rose to his feet, preparing for the cross-examination that could make or break the case. Dr. Richards, I have a few questions for you, Fields said, his tone polite but firm. You've stated that the patent's timing is consistent with industry practices, but aren't you aware that the plaintiff's patent mirrors, quite closely, technology that was publicly available before the patent's filing? Dr. Richards hesitated for a moment, as if taken off guard by the question. I am aware of the similarities, but in my professional opinion, the plaintiff's claims are based on novel applications of existing technology, and therefore, the patent is valid. Fields raised an eyebrow. And have you looked into the patent portfolios of other companies in the same field to see if any of their technologies predate the plaintiff's filing? Dr. Richards' composure seemed to waver slightly. I have not conducted a full review of other companies' portfolios. My analysis focused solely on the plaintiff's filing. Fields nodded, pressing on. So, you've based your conclusions solely on the plaintiff's narrative and evidence, without considering the broader context of the industry? Richards shifted in his seat, his expression growing more defensive. I have conducted a thorough analysis based on the materials provided to me, and I stand by my conclusions. The defense team exchanged glances, knowing they had just found a chink in Dr. Richards' armor. Fields wasn't done, though. Isn't it true that many industry experts have raised concerns about the patent system being used as a tool for blocking innovation rather than fostering it? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Dr. Richards appeared to struggle for an answer. The jury watched, sensing the shift in momentum. Donovan clenched her jaw, frustration mounting as her expert witness faltered under cross-examination. Musk, from the back of the room, couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The prosecution's case was crumbling before his eyes. His earlier intervention had planted the seeds of doubt, and now the defense was capitalizing on it. The judge, sensing that the tension in the courtroom was rising, called for a brief recess. "We will take a 10-minute break. This is a critical moment, and I ask both sides to review the evidence thoroughly before we proceed." As the courtroom emptied once more, the defense team gathered around Musk. Fields looked at him with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "That was well played, Mr. Musk. You've done what many thought was impossible. Turn this whole case on its head." "We're almost there." Musk gave a modest smile. "It's not over yet, but if we keep pushing, we can expose the bigger issue here. This isn't just about one patent. It's about how the system is rigged to protect the powerful, not the innovators." Back in the prosecution's corner, Donovan was seething. She had lost ground, and the case was slipping out of her control, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. "We still have a few tricks up our sleeve," she muttered to herself, her mind racing as she plotted her next move. The trial had reached a tipping point. The prosecution was on the defensive, the jury was clearly torn, and Musk's strategic moves had irrevocably altered the direction of the case. The question now wasn't just whether Musk could help the defense win. It was whether the entire legal system could survive the weight of the revelations that had been uncovered. The courtroom reconvened after the brief recess, but the atmosphere was distinctly different from before. The once certain air of the prosecution was now tinged with uncertainty. Donovan's sharp, practiced demeanor was still intact, but her mind was working overtime. The shift in momentum was clear. The defense, bolstered by Musk's unexpected yet brilliant interventions, was on the rise, and she knew her next steps were crucial if she had any chance of regaining control of the case. Judge Thompson tapped his gavel. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice echoing in the now silent room. Donovan cleared her throat and stood, addressing the jury as she returned to the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I understand the confusion that has been introduced into this case. However, I urge you to remember that this trial is not about whether or not the patent system is flawed. It is about whether the plaintiff has the rightful claim to the invention described in the patent." Her eyes locked with Fields for a moment, before turning to Musk. The defense had been on the offensive, but now it was her turn to lead the charge. She wasn't about to let a series of well-placed arguments derail everything she had worked for. "We will not be distracted by broad, sweeping claims of corruption or manipulation," Donovan continued, "but instead, we will focus on the facts. And the facts show that the plaintiff, as the original inventor of this technology, has the legal right to the patent in question." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, as if the realization of how close she was to losing had sparked something fierce within her. Next, she turned toward her witness. "We'll now call upon a new expert witness, someone who has spent years in the field of patent law and who can provide clarity on the legitimacy of the patent's claims." The room fell silent as another figure stood to join Donovan at the front of the courtroom. This time, it was not just any lawyer or expert in the field of intellectual property. It was someone with a track record that could challenge even the strongest of defenses. Enter Robert Allen, a well-known patent litigator who had secured victory in some of the most high-profile cases in the industry. Known for his aggressive tactics and unwavering confidence, Robert was the kind of legal powerhouse that could turn the tide in an instant. Allen, a tall, sharp-featured man in his early 50s, moved confidently to the witness stand, his suit impeccably tailored. He addressed the judge with a calm nod. "Your Honor, I've reviewed the materials related to this patent and the claims presented by the defense, and I stand by the assertion that the plaintiff's patent is valid and original." Donovan gave him a slight smile of approval before looking toward the jury. "Mr. Allen, could you explain, in your professional opinion, why this patent should be upheld as legitimate?" "Of course," Robert Allen began, his voice cool and authoritative. "After thoroughly reviewing the claims and cross-referencing them with existing patents in the field, I've found no evidence of prior art that would invalidate this patent. The technology described is not merely an adaptation of existing work. It is a novel advancement in its own right." Musk shifted in his seat, eyes narrowing slightly. He had heard this kind of language before. Allen's confidence was impressive, But Musk was beginning to wonder if the expert was too reliant on what he could see on paper, too focused on legal precedent, and not enough on the innovation itself. You're suggesting that the plaintiff's patent represents a breakthrough in its field? Fields asked, standing up to cross-examine. Absolutely, Allen replied, his voice never wavering. The technology in question pushes the boundaries of what is currently available. The claims made by the plaintiff are well within legal limits and are, in my expert opinion, fully deserving of patent protection. Fields remained standing, his brow furrowed as he prepared his next line of questioning. He had suspected that the prosecution might bring in Allen to salvage their case, but he wasn't going to let the situation unfold without challenging him. Mr. Allen, you say the technology is a breakthrough, Fields began. But I ask you this. Can you point to any instances in which the plaintiff demonstrated the working prototype or used the technology in a commercial capacity before filing for this patent? Allen hesitated for a fraction of a second. Well, that's a different question. The patent filing was done within the legal time frame, and commercial application isn't always required at the time of filing. Fields pushed further. But isn't it true that without proof of application or prior public demonstration, the patent is essentially claiming ownership of an idea rather than a product? Isn't there a risk that such patents can be used to block genuine innovation from others who may have been working on similar technologies? The room was still. For a moment, even Judge Thompson seemed to pause, considering Fields' words. It wasn't often that a cross-examination would make even the most confident of experts falter. But Allen, a seasoned litigator, didn't back down. Not at all, he countered quickly. The patent system exists to protect ideas that are new and non-obvious. The fact that someone else might have had a similar idea doesn't invalidate the patent. What matters is whether the invention is novel, and this one clearly is. Fields, seeing the exchange was reaching an impasse, decided to take a different approach. Mr. Allen, you've spent most of your career defending patents like this, so I have to ask, is there a financial incentive for you to support this patent? Could your own business interests be influencing your testimony? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, a crack appeared in Allen's confident facade. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. The insinuation was bold, and Fields knew it would hit hard. But Allen recovered quickly, shaking his head. I'm here to provide an expert opinion, not to engage in personal business interests, he replied, though there was a slight edge to his voice. My analysis is objective, based purely on the evidence. Despite his calm response, the jury seemed to take note of the tension that had crept into the exchange. It was subtle, but it was there. Musk, in the back of the courtroom, couldn't help but smile. Fields' persistence was beginning to wear on the prosecution. The questions being raised were difficult ones, and no matter how polished Allen's testimony was, the cracks in the case were starting to show. But just as the defense appeared to be gaining ground, Donovan was far from finished. She had one more card to play. We will now take a short break, Judge Thompson said, his voice breaking the momentary silence. Please, review the material carefully before we reconvene. As the room cleared, Donovan took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. She knew the defense had gained ground, but she also knew it wasn't over yet. There was more at play here than just the patent. She needed to figure out what Musk's ultimate game was. What was his true goal in all of this? The break was brief, but the effects it had on the courtroom were profound. As people filtered back into their seats, there was a palpable shift. It wasn't just about the patent anymore. The trial had turned into something larger, a battle over the very principles that govern technology, innovation, and the way business was done in the modern age. Elon Musk's quiet presence in the back of the courtroom was now more than just that of a tech mogul or a witness. It was as if he was orchestrating the entire event from the shadows. Musk sat with his arms crossed, watching the players move in front of him. His mind, usually occupied with building the next big thing, was fully engaged in this case, even if it wasn't immediately clear what his true objectives were. The more he observed, the more he realized how fragile the balance of power was in a courtroom like this. The prosecution had come prepared, but they were now fighting an uphill battle against something far bigger than legal tactics. They were battling a shift in public perception, a shift Musk had helped ignite. Donovan, already at the front of the courtroom, was preparing for the next phase of the trial. She could sense the urgency building, and though she maintained her composure, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tide was turning against her. Musk's involvement, while initially brushed off as nothing more than a nuisance, was starting to look like the key to unlocking the entire case. She had to regain control or risk losing everything. Judge Thompson called the room to order once again, his gavel's sharp echo breaking the collective silence. "We will now proceed. Ms. Donovan, I believe you have additional evidence to present?" Donovan nodded firmly and stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. As we move into the final phase of this trial, I ask the jury to consider not just the legal validity of the patent in question, but the very foundation upon which this lawsuit is based. It's clear that the defense is trying to discredit the legitimacy of this patent by introducing irrelevant distractions about the patent system and business practices. But we must remember that this case is not about attacking the system itself. It's about ensuring that the rights of inventors are protected." She turned to the jury, her voice now full of passion. "Innovation is what drives us forward. Without a strong and enforceable patent system, inventors like the plaintiff would have no protection for their creations. It's that simple." Her words were bold, but as she spoke, Donovan couldn't ignore the sense that her confidence was starting to feel less like conviction and more like a desperate attempt to cling to the narrative she had created. Musk's subtle influence was everywhere. She could feel it, and she knew the jury could sense it too. "We call our final witness," she continued, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Mr. Alan Richards, a renowned economist who has studied the impact of patents on technological development, particularly in the field we're dealing with here." A hush fell over the room as Alan Richards took the stand. His credentials were impressive, decades of experience and a reputation for impartiality. But this wasn't just about him providing testimony. It was about shifting the focus back to the patent and its economic importance. Richards was a middle-aged man with graying hair and an aura of respectability. His manner was calm, collected, and precise. "Ladies and gentlemen, the patent system is a cornerstone of technological progress," he began, addressing the jury. "Without it, inventors have no guarantee that their creations will not be copied or exploited by larger, more established players. It is essential for fostering innovation and ensuring that the risks taken by inventors are rewarded." Donovan watched him with a slight sense of relief. Richard's testimony would reaffirm what she had been trying to convey all along. That this case was about much more than one patent. It was about the integrity of the patent system as a whole. "Mr. Richards," she asked, "would you agree that the patent in question represents a legitimate and novel advancement in technology?" "Absolutely," Richards replied. "In my analysis, the claims made by the plaintiff are both novel and non-obvious. The invention stands apart from any prior art, and there is no question that the patent is valid under current law." The defense team was silent for a moment, and Fields exchanged a glance with Musk. They knew what would come next, their chance to dismantle Richards' testimony and once again shake the foundation of the prosecution's case. Fields rose from his seat, moving toward the witness stand with measured steps. "Mr. Richards, with all due respect, I have a few questions. You've stated that the patent is valid, but I must ask, are you aware of any circumstances in which patents like the one in question have been used not to protect innovation, but rather to stifle competition?" Richards appeared momentarily thrown off by the question. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." "Let me clarify," Fields continued. "Are you familiar with the concept of patent trolling, where patents are used not to protect an inventor's rights, but to block others from innovating in a particular field?" Richards hesitated. "Yes, I am familiar with that concept. However, I don't believe that this case involves any such actions. This patent was filed in good faith." Fields wasn't finished. "Mr. Richards, I'll remind you that we've already established that the plaintiff's company has been involved in multiple patent disputes in the past, many of which have resulted in legal challenges against small innovators. Isn't it possible that this patent is being used as a tool for such practices?" Richards looked visibly uncomfortable now. "I cannot speak to the plaintiff's other legal matters, but in the context of this specific patent, my analysis does not suggest any malicious intent." The jury was watching closely. Fields had struck a nerve, and though Richards was maintaining his composure, there was a crack in his otherwise confident testimony. Fields' strategy was clear. to cast doubt on the purity of the patent system and make the jury question whether the plaintiff was truly an inventor or just a player in a much larger game. Musk, still sitting at the back of the room, couldn't help but smirk. Fields was masterful in his approach. His questioning was subtle but sharp, and it was making Richards sweat. The prosecution's perfect narrative was beginning to unravel, and Musk knew that once the jury started doubting Richards, everything that came after would be questioned as well. As the cross-examination continued, Donovan's eyes narrowed. She had underestimated Fields, and she had certainly underestimated Musk. But it wasn't just about tactics anymore. The heart of the case had become something bigger, a battle between the established system and the growing demand for change. She needed to regain control, and quickly. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was alive with the murmur of discussions as the cross-examination of Mr. Richards came to an uneasy halt. The defense had struck a significant blow, one that Donovan, despite her best efforts, had failed to anticipate. Musk's presence, though subtle, had planted a seed of doubt that was slowly growing in the minds of the jury. Judge Thompson, sensing that the momentum had shifted yet again, cleared his throat and turned his gaze to the proceedings. "Mr. Fields, you have further questions for Mr. Richards?" Fields, still standing, took a moment before responding. "Yes, Your Honor." He glanced toward the witness stand, making sure to catch Richards' eye. "Mr. Richards, you've testified about the novel nature of this patent, and I respect your analysis. However, I'd like to ask you about something else entirely, the broader implications of the current patent system." Richards looked confused for a brief moment, but he nodded. "I'm happy to discuss it, Mr. Fields, but I'd like to remind you that this trial is about the specific patent in question, not a discussion of systemic issues." Fields didn't hesitate. "But the systemic issues are exactly what's at the heart of this case. If we don't acknowledge that, how can we trust the very foundation on which this patent rests?" Richards remained silent for a second, his mind seemingly racing. "I'll ask again," Fields continued. "Given your experience, do you believe that the current patent system incentivizes the right kind of innovation? Or does it allow big corporations to stifle progress through monopolistic claims?" The courtroom was silent now, every eye fixed on Richards, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable. The simple question had dug into the heart of something much larger than patent law itself. The power of massive corporations to hold entire industries hostage with patents that could halt progress, hold innovators at bay, and even crush smaller competitors under the weight of endless litigation. Richards faltered, the self-assuredness he had displayed earlier now replaced by hesitation. "I don't believe that this case should be viewed through that lens, Mr. Fields. My analysis was strictly on the merit of the patent." Fields' voice dropped, and he leaned in slightly, almost as if sharing a secret with the jury. "You see, that's the problem, isn't it? Too many experts and officials like you focus only on the technical aspects of a patent and ignore the far-reaching consequences it may have for real innovation." He turned to the jury, pointing toward Musk, who was seated at the back, watching intently. "Do we really believe that a man like Mr. Musk, an inventor, a disruptor, should be forced to bow down to the very system that seeks to protect those who are actively preventing progress?" The question hung in the air like an unspoken accusation, and for the first time in the trial, Donovan could feel the heat of the courtroom shift directly onto her. Musk's reputation, his very presence, was starting to color every argument. His influence, once understated, was now undeniable. Richards, visibly rattled, cleared his throat. "I am simply stating the facts as I see them. I am not taking a position on systemic issues." Fields, seeing the expert witness crumble under pressure, shifted his attention back to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." The moment was heavy, almost suffocating. The prosecution had been handed a serious blow, one that couldn't easily be ignored. As Richards returned to his seat, the jury exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Donovan stood, her heart racing. It wasn't just the testimony that had been compromised. It was the very foundation of her case. And in that moment, She understood that Musk had done exactly what he had set out to do. Expose the cracks in a system that was meant to protect innovation but, in reality, often served to suppress it. She had no choice but to push forward. "Your Honor," Donovan began, her voice steady, "I request a brief recess. There are additional witnesses we intend to call in order to counter the narrative presented by the defense." Judge Thompson nodded. "Granted. We will reconvene in 30 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, Donovan took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. The defense had made its case, and it was clear that the jury had been swayed. Musk wasn't just a witness in this trial. He was the catalyst for something much larger. The implications of his involvement stretched beyond this courtroom, beyond the case at hand, and into the very heart of intellectual property law. She gathered her thoughts, knowing that this wasn't just a battle for the validity of one patent. It was a fight for control of the future of technology itself. The recess seemed to drag on, as if time itself was stretching, forcing everyone involved to confront the deepening reality of the situation. Musk's subtle maneuvering had destabilized the case in ways Donovan hadn't expected. The arguments had shifted from the technical to the ideological, and that was territory she wasn't fully prepared to navigate. Outside the courtroom, she found herself pacing, her mind whirring. How had it come to this? She had always prided herself on being able to outmaneuver anyone in the courtroom. But Musk had played her like a puppet, and now she wasn't sure how to regain the upper hand. The door to the hallway creaked open, and a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Rachel, Donovan's assistant. She was carrying a briefcase, a look of concern on her face. "Ms. Donovan, I've just received word from the senior partners," she said, voice low. "There's a meeting scheduled, immediately." Donovan's jaw tightened. She knew what this meant. If the senior partners were calling her in, it was because they were losing faith in her ability to win this case. The pressure was mounting from all sides. "Tell them I'll be there shortly," Donovan replied, her voice cold. Her assistant nodded and hurried off, leaving Donovan standing in the hallway, the weight of everything pressing down on her. There was only one thing left to do: find a way to win this case, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, Musk sat silently, his eyes never leaving the proceedings. Fields was speaking to the jury with a quiet intensity, continuing to weave his arguments. Musk's influence wasn't obvious, but it was undeniable. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since the trial had started, he could see the pieces falling into place. No matter what happened in the next few days, Musk knew one thing for sure. This trial wasn't just about patents. It was about changing the way the world viewed innovation, and he was here for it. The courthouse buzzed with an energy that seemed almost palpable as the recess ended. Lawyers returned to their seats, witnesses readied themselves, and the jury, now fully aware that they were witnessing something bigger than a simple patent dispute, settled into their chairs. Elon Musk, seemingly unbothered by the drama unfolding, sat back, his eyes narrowed in thought. The trial had evolved into something far more complex than he had initially anticipated. But now, it was no longer just about proving his point. It was about ensuring that a message would be heard loud and clear. The future of innovation depended on challenging the status quo. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom, his gavel coming down with a sharp crack. "Let's resume," he said, his voice cutting through the room. The tension was thick, but it was clear that Donovan's confidence had taken a hit. She had no choice but to step up and regroup if she was going to salvage the case. Donovan stood, her resolve hardening. The prosecution was at a crossroads, and if she couldn't regain control now, it would slip from her grasp entirely. She needed something, anything, to destabilize the defense. She glanced at her assistant, who had just returned to her side, and the nervous energy was evident in her eyes. "Are we ready?" Donovan asked, her voice sharp. "Yes, Ms. Donovan," the assistant replied, handing her a thick file. "Everything's in order. But the partners are anxious. They expect results." Donovan barely nodded. The pressure from her firm had never been so intense. There was no way back now. It was all or nothing. Turning to face the judge, she squared her shoulders. "Your Honor, I request permission to introduce new evidence that directly challenges the legitimacy of the defense's claims." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow but nodded. Proceed. Donovan's heart raced. She had been holding this piece of evidence back for just the right moment, and now that moment had arrived. Members of the jury, she began, her voice ringing with authority. The defense would like you to believe that the patent at the heart of this case is legitimate and unique. However, we have discovered key information that casts serious doubt on the plaintiff's claims of originality. The jury leaned forward, their attention fully engaged. Musk, sitting at the back of the courtroom, watched carefully. He knew Donovan had a knack for making things dramatic. He had seen it countless times in corporate boardrooms and legal battles. But this time, he wasn't sure she had the leverage she thought she did. Donovan turned toward the screen at the front of the room. What you see here, she said, is a series of communications between the plaintiff's company and various competitors, communications that suggest the plaintiff was aware of similar technologies being developed by other companies at the same time this patent was filed. A murmur spread through the courtroom as the document appeared on the screen. Musk's eyes flickered. He hadn't expected this. This was a direct attack on the plaintiff's integrity. Donovan had just pulled a rabbit out of the hat, but would it be enough? These emails, Donovan continued, are proof that the plaintiff was aware of existing technologies and had been in direct discussions with industry leaders about similar ideas. This raises serious questions about the originality of the patent in question. She let the words sink in, waiting for the jury to absorb the weight of the information. She could feel the tide shifting slightly in her favor, just enough to regain a bit of control, but Fields was already on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he said quickly, his voice sharp. "This is irrelevant. These communications have nothing to do with the specific technology outlined in the patent. The issue here is whether the patent meets the legal requirements of novelty and originality, and that has already been addressed by our experts." Judge Thompson turned to Donovan. "Your Honor, I believe it is highly relevant. If the plaintiff's claims are based on technology they were aware of but failed to disclose, then the entire patent should be questioned." The judge's gaze flickered between the two attorneys, his face unreadable. Sustained. "However, I caution the prosecution. Ensure that this information is tied directly to the matter at hand." Donovan's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being rebuffed so bluntly, but the sting only sharpened her focus. She would find a way to use this information to her advantage, no matter how the defense tried to wriggle out of it. "Thank you, Your Honor," Donovan said, her tone steady, though her mind was already racing with strategies. Fields didn't waste any time. He moved swiftly toward the witness stand, casting a look over his shoulder at Musk, who gave him a slight nod. Fields was about to strike again, and Donovan knew it. He took the floor with a calm but measured presence. "Mr. Allen," he said, turning to the expert witness, "we've just seen documents that suggest the plaintiff may have been aware of existing technologies while filing their patent. How does that square with your testimony that this invention is novel and non-obvious?" Allen straightened in his seat, the challenge immediate and direct. "That is simply not the case. The technologies mentioned in those communications are not the same as the technology outlined in the patent in question. Those are unrelated, generalized ideas." "But isn't it true, Mr. Allen," Fields pressed, "that the existence of prior art, whether it's similar or not, can seriously undermine the claim to originality? Doesn't this directly affect the strength of the patent in question?" Allen paused, clearly uncomfortable under the intense scrutiny. "I cannot speak to the specifics of the email shown, but I stand by my professional opinion that the invention described in the patent is novel and non-obvious." The tension in the room was palpable, and Donovan couldn't help but feel the pressure mounting. Fields had expertly deflected the blow she had delivered. Musk, though silent, was still pulling strings behind the scenes. She could sense it. Then, something unexpected happened. Judge Thompson, who had been quiet up until now, leaned forward and addressed the court. "I believe we've reached a crucial point in this case. We will take a short break to review the information presented. Both parties will have an opportunity to address the jury in closing arguments once we reconvene." The gavel came down, signaling a pause in the proceedings. Outside the courtroom, Donovan found herself pacing. Her mind was working at full speed, calculating her next move, but for the first time in this case, she was unsure of herself. The evidence she had presented should have been a game-changer, but Fields had turned it around. The influence of Musk's behind-the-scenes maneuvering was clear. It wasn't just the courtroom drama she had to contend with. It was the vast network Musk controlled that was starting to pull the strings. As she walked toward her assistant, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from her senior partner. "The clock is ticking. You need to win this, Rachel. We're losing confidence." The word stung. She had always been the one to turn the tide, to find a way when there seemed to be no way. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The trial had become more than just a legal battle. It was about reputation, power, and control of the future. She took a deep breath and looked toward the courtroom doors. It wasn't over. Not yet. The break had been brief, but it felt like an eternity to everyone involved. Donovan was feeling the weight of the trial bearing down on her. The tension in the courtroom had escalated to an almost unbearable level. She had worked her entire career to get to this point, but now, for the first time, she was unsure if her strategy would carry her through. The defense had skillfully undermined the impact of the evidence she had presented, and it was clear that Musk's influence over the entire trial was growing stronger by the minute. She had to find a way to turn this around before it was too late. As the doors to the courtroom opened and everyone returned to their seats, Donovan took a deep breath. Her heart was pounding, and the stakes had never felt higher. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment where everything would be decided. Judge Thompson sat at the bench, tapping his gavel. "We are now ready to proceed with closing arguments. Ms. Donovan, you may begin." Donovan stood up, her back straight, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. She had one last chance to make her case, and she couldn't afford to falter. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but firm. "We stand at a crossroads in this case, but it's important to remember why we are here. We are here because of a simple principle. Innovation must be protected. The patent system was created to safeguard the hard work of inventors and give them the opportunity to bring their ideas to life. Without that protection, the very spirit of innovation would be crushed under the weight of corporate interests and monopolies." She paused, scanning the jury, trying to gauge their reactions. Some faces were neutral, others skeptical. But Donovan knew she needed to strike now, before Musk's shadow loomed too large over the room. "The plaintiff in this case," she continued, "has followed the proper steps to protect their intellectual property. They've created something new, something groundbreaking. And that's why the patent in question is not just valid, it's essential. We cannot allow those who seek to stifle progress to succeed. The defendant would like you to believe that this patent is somehow a weapon, a tool used to block progress. But I ask you to consider, if we allow this patent to be invalidated based on dubious arguments, we open the door for the entire patent system to be undermined." She could feel the weight of her words landing as she spoke. If we allow this to happen, we send a message that patents no longer mean anything, that they can be easily overturned, ignored, or manipulated for financial gain. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? There was a moment of silence. Donovan could feel the tension in the air, the room hanging on her every word. She took a step back and allowed her statement to resonate. "But there is something else we must acknowledge," she said, her voice lowering, almost as if sharing a secret. "The defendant, Mr. Fields, would have you believe that the plaintiff's company is a villain, that they've used their patent for the wrong reasons. But let me remind you of something that has been lost in all of the noise. The plaintiff's company is not the problem here. The problem is the system itself. And that is exactly what the defense is trying to distract you from. They want you to focus on the technicalities, on the past, rather than the future." She turned toward the defense table. Fields and Musk were sitting side by side, their faces unreadable. "The defense would like you to think that innovation is about playing by the rules of an outdated, corrupt system. But that is not what innovation is about. Innovation is about breaking barriers, challenging the norms, and pushing the boundaries of what is possible." She let that statement hang in the air for a moment before making her final point. This case isn't just about the plaintiff and the defendant. It's about the future of technology, the future of patents, and the future of innovation itself. The question you must ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is this: do we want to protect the rights of inventors, or do we want to allow powerful corporations to monopolize innovation and stifle progress? She stepped back, meeting the eyes of the jury, allowing her words to settle in their minds. It wasn't just a legal argument anymore. It was a moral one. "Thank you," she said simply. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Donovan could feel the weight of her words settle over the room. But as she returned to her seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She had made her case, yes, but it wasn't enough. Not against the backdrop of Musk's quiet influence, not against the sense that the jury was leaning in a different direction. Fields stood up, his calm demeanor belying the intensity of his words. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution would have you believe that this case is about protecting innovation. But that's not the truth. This case is about protecting one company's monopoly, one company's stranglehold over an entire market. This is about a system that is designed not to protect innovation, but to maintain the status quo, one where large corporations with deep pockets can crush smaller competitors under the weight of endless litigation." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But what the prosecution hasn't told you is this. The very system they are asking you to defend has been used to stifle progress. The patent system, as it exists today, is being manipulated to block true innovation. The plaintiff's company is no saint. It has used its patents not to foster creativity, but to block new ideas, to prevent new technologies from reaching the market." Fields glanced toward Musk, who gave him a subtle nod. There was a quiet understanding between them, a shared vision for the future of technology that went beyond the confines of this courtroom. Musk wasn't just playing a game here. He was laying the groundwork for something far bigger. "Now," Fields continued, his voice rising slightly, "the prosecution would like you to think that this case is about one patent. But it's not. This is about the future of intellectual property law, and whether or not we, as a society, are going to let outdated systems stifle progress." He turned toward Donovan, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We have a choice. We can choose to continue down a path that leads to monopolization and stagnation. Or we can choose a future where innovation is protected, not by obsolete patents, but by a system that actually encourages creativity and competition." The room was charged with energy now, the jury members' expressions hard to read. Fields had crafted a narrative that spoke not just to the legal questions at hand, but to the heart of the issues surrounding patents and innovation. And in that moment, Donovan knew it was going to take everything she had to convince the jury otherwise. Judge Thompson stood and gave a slight nod. "The jury will now deliberate. We will reconvene once they've reached a verdict." The gavel came down, and the courtroom emptied, the air thick with anticipation. As Donovan walked out, she caught a glimpse of Musk, sitting quietly, his hands folded in front of him, as if this was just another step in a larger game. He had played his cards well, and now it was up to the jury. She had done everything she could. But was it enough? The courtroom was almost eerily quiet as the jury filed in, each member carefully taking their seat, eyes focused ahead. Donovan stood at the front, her posture tense, her mind racing through every detail of the trial. She had given everything she had, every argument, every piece of evidence. She had thrown everything into the mix, hoping the jury would be swayed by her vision of a future where innovation was protected. But now, it was out of her hands. Fields and Musk sat across the room, calm and collected. Fields had been confident during the entire trial, and Musk's cool demeanor hadn't changed. As the jury took their places, Donovan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spent years honing her skills, climbing the ranks of her firm. But this case was different. It wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that the system could still be trusted to protect creators, to protect new ideas. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, stood up. Her eyes flicked nervously around the room before she spoke. "We have, Your Honor." The moment stretched out longer than it should have, the tension nearly unbearable. Donovan held her breath, waiting for the words that would determine everything. Judge Thompson nodded. "Please deliver the verdict." The foreperson cleared her throat again before turning to face the judge. "In the matter of the plaintiff versus the defendant, we, the jury, find in favor of the defendant, Mr. Musk, and his company." The patent in question is hereby declared invalid due to lack of originality and non-obviousness. The words hit Donovan like a physical blow. She felt her knees weaken, her breath catching in her chest. The verdict was final. The case was over, and she had lost. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the jury foreperson returned to her seat. Musk sat still, but a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Fields looked satisfied, his posture relaxed, as if the outcome had been inevitable all along. Judge Thompson looked down at his papers. This court is adjourned. The ruling stands. With that, the gavel came down. The noise that followed felt muffled to Donovan, as if the world had suddenly become distant and unreal. Her mind raced, but she couldn't seem to process what had just happened. The case she had worked so hard for, fought so hard for, had slipped through her fingers. All of her planning, her strategies, had amounted to nothing in the end. As the courtroom began to empty, Donovan remained motionless at the front, her hands gripping the podium. She barely registered the presence of her assistant, who stood nervously beside her. "Ms. Donovan," her assistant whispered, "are you okay?" Donovan didn't respond right away. Her thoughts were scattered. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had anticipated challenges, even setbacks. But this was a defeat that went beyond the courtroom. She had given everything to this case, and now she had lost not only a battle but her own sense of direction. She could feel the walls closing in. With a deep breath, she nodded. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice more cold than she intended. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. Not by a long shot. Outside the courthouse, the press had already gathered. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, eager to catch any glimpse of emotion from the key players in the case. Musk emerged first, surrounded by a throng of reporters. His face was calm, almost serene, as if this was just another day in the life of a billionaire innovator. Fields followed closely behind, his grin wide, clearly pleased with the outcome. The reporters turned to Donovan as she emerged, her expression unreadable. One of the reporters stepped forward. "Ms. Donovan, what do you have to say about today's verdict?" Donovan's eyes flickered briefly toward Musk, but she kept her composure. "I believe the verdict speaks for itself," she said, her voice steady. "Innovation and intellectual property law are complex. I disagree with the jury's decision, but I respect the process." She turned to leave, but the questions kept coming. She didn't answer. The truth was, she didn't know what to say. What could she say? The words felt hollow, empty. She had fought for a principle, for the belief that the patent system could protect true creators, but the jury had chosen a different path. Inside the courthouse, Musk and Fields were speaking quietly, discussing the next steps. Fields was already thinking about how they could use the verdict to their advantage. Musk, however, seemed distant, his thoughts elsewhere. He had won, but the victory wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. "This is just the beginning," Fields said, a satisfied tone in his voice. "We've made a statement. Now the patent system is in our hands." Musk nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had fought for a bigger cause than just winning a lawsuit. This case, this trial, was merely a stepping stone, a part of a much grander plan. He had set in motion a series of events that would change the landscape of intellectual property forever. The patent system, the very foundation of how innovation was protected, would soon be forced to evolve. But the victory came at a cost. Musk could sense the gravity of it. The lives affected by this case, the damage to relationships that had been irreparably altered. Donovan's struggle had been sincere, even if her methods were flawed. And somewhere deep down, Musk couldn't help but feel a pang of respect for her. Back at her office, Donovan stared out the window, her mind replaying the trial in excruciating detail. She knew she had made mistakes, had miscalculated certain aspects of the case. But there was something else, something she couldn't shake. Something about Musk. He had been playing a game she hadn't fully understood. Her phone buzzed on her desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an email from one of the senior partners at her firm. "Rachel, we need to talk. Meet us at the office first thing tomorrow morning. There are a lot of decisions to make." She sighed, the weight of her defeat pressing down on her. She had lost this battle, but it wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The future was still uncertain, and she would figure out a way to keep fighting for herself, for the system, for innovation. Elon Musk, meanwhile, sat in his office late that night, staring out at the city below. His thoughts were focused on the long-term vision, the changes that needed to happen to make innovation a force that could not be controlled by patents, corporations, or legal systems. His role in this trial was only a small part of a much bigger picture. For now, the battle was over. But Musk knew that the war was far from finished. The days following the trial were a blur for Rachel Donovan. She had barely slept, her thoughts constantly racing, processing the implications of the verdict. The loss was more than just a professional setback. It felt like a personal defeat. She had been so sure, so convinced that the principles she fought for were right. But now, with the jury's decision still fresh in her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if everything she believed in had been wrong. At her office, the phone calls and emails flooded in. Some were from colleagues, offering support or asking for updates on her next steps. Others were from clients, anxious to know how the case would impact their businesses. She answered each one mechanically, her mind still somewhere else. There was one call, however, that caught her attention. It was from her old mentor, David Carter, a former partner at the firm who had retired a few years ago. "Rachel, I heard about the verdict." His voice was calm, but there was an underlying concern. "Listen, I know this feels like a blow right now, but don't let it define you." Rachel felt a pang in her chest. David had been a guiding force for her, shaping much of her legal career. His advice had always been wise, measured, and rooted in a deep understanding of the law. "I don't know if I can keep going, David," she admitted, the frustration evident in her voice. "I thought I had everything figured out. I thought we were fighting for something meaningful." David paused for a moment, his voice steady but firm. "Sometimes, Rachel, the fight isn't about the outcome. It's about the bigger picture. This is just one case. And what you're feeling, that's the cost of truly caring about what you do. Don't let this one loss make you forget who you are." Rachel closed her eyes, taking in his words. He was right, of course. She had always fought for the greater good, and one loss couldn't erase everything she had worked for. But right now, it felt like it could. She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The world outside her office window seemed distant, almost surreal. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain. But deep down, she knew she couldn't just give up. There was more at stake than just her own career. There was a need for change. She had seen it in the courtroom, in the faces of the jurors, in the way Musk and his defense team had played the system. She couldn't let that go unchallenged. Meanwhile, across town, Elon Musk was in a much different frame of mind. He sat in his minimalist office, staring at the blueprints of his latest project, a new kind of renewable energy technology, one that he believed could revolutionize the way the world powered itself. But his thoughts weren't entirely focused on the project itself. Instead, he was thinking about the trial, the way it had unfolded, and more specifically, how it had ended. The win was sweet, but it didn't provide the satisfaction he had expected. There was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind, a sense that something wasn't right. The legal battle had been one piece of a larger puzzle, but the true battle was still ahead. Musk had long been frustrated by the way the intellectual property system had been used to stifle competition. He saw it as a tool that, rather than encouraging innovation, had been weaponized by large corporations to prevent smaller players from making breakthroughs. The patent system, in his mind, needed to be overhauled. He wasn't content with just winning in court. He needed to ensure that the system itself changed, that innovation was allowed to flourish unimpeded. He had been part of the problem for years, but now, with this victory under his belt, he could start to build the kind of future he wanted, one where patents didn't limit progress. But as he stared at the blueprints for his new energy project, a thought crossed his mind. What if Rachel Donovan isn't done with this fight yet? Days later, Donovan found herself back at her firm, sitting in a meeting with the senior partners. She was still reeling from the trial, her confidence shaken, but she knew this was a necessary step. They needed to decide what came next. The head partner, Thomas Keene, was the first to speak. "Rachel, you know we're behind you. But we also need to look at the bigger picture. The patent system is changing. Musk's win in court is a signal, and we need to adjust our approach. This could be a good time for you to reconsider your strategy." Donovan nodded, trying to focus on his words. She knew they were right. The landscape had shifted. The legal world was changing, and the rules that had guided her for so long no longer seemed as reliable. "I understand," she said quietly, but she couldn't help but feel a lingering doubt. But is that enough? Do we just accept that Musk and others like him will change the system to suit their needs? Are we just going to let innovation become another commodity, something that's controlled by a select few? Keane leaned forward, his tone softening. "Rachel, it's not about letting them control the system. It's about adapting. The law is constantly evolving, and if we want to stay relevant, we have to be ahead of the curve. You've done well in the past. We trust you to figure this out." Donovan sat in silence for a moment. She appreciated the trust, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. She had always prided herself on fighting for what was right. But now, she realized, the fight was bigger than just one case, one firm. It was about the future of innovation itself. The system needed to change. But how? That night, Donovan couldn't sleep. Her mind was consumed with the question, what now? She had spent years climbing the ranks, working hard, and yet it all felt meaningless in the face of Musk's victory. She knew she couldn't just accept the status quo. Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. It was a message from her old colleague, Jake, a brilliant lawyer who had left the firm a few months ago. He had always been a bit of a rebel, someone who questioned the system rather than accepting it. "Rachel, I've been thinking about the case. I know you're feeling defeated right now, but I think I found something. If you're interested in really making a change, I think we need to take this fight to the next level." Donovan's curiosity was piqued. She texted back quickly. "What do you mean? What's your idea?" Jake's reply came fast. "Meet me tomorrow. I think we can take Musk's whole strategy apart." For the first time in days, Donovan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the fight wasn't over after all. The following morning, Rachel Donovan arrived at the coffee shop where she had agreed to meet Jake. It was a quiet place on the outskirts of the city, far from the bustling offices and the weight of the legal world she'd been inhabiting for the past weeks. As she entered, she saw Jake sitting at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him and a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as she approached and gave her a knowing smile. "You look like you've been through a war," Jake said, gesturing for her to sit down. Rachel dropped into the chair, the weight of her recent loss still hanging over her. "Feels like I've been," she replied, trying to smile but not quite managing it. "What's this about, Jake? You said you had something that could take Musk's strategy apart. What do you mean?" Jake leaned forward, his eyes alight with determination. "It's not just about patents anymore, Rachel. It's about power. Musk has played the legal system, and he's winning. But the thing is, the way he's doing it, it's all built on a house of cards. A very clever one, but still a house of cards." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You're not talking about something like a countersuit, are you? Because that's not going to work. We already tried that, and we lost." No, not a countersuit," Jake said, shaking his head. "This is bigger. We need to expose the system itself, Rachel. The game Musk is playing, the one he's getting away with, it's not just about using patents to block competition. He's exploiting the very vulnerabilities of the system, the ones no one's paying attention to, but we can." Rachel's curiosity was piqued, despite her lingering doubts. "What vulnerabilities?" Jake opened his laptop and turned it toward her, showing her a series of legal documents. "The patent system is riddled with loopholes. It's outdated, yes, but more than that, it's been hijacked. There are ways to leverage these weaknesses to our advantage. Ways to make Musk's empire look like the house of cards it really is." Rachel glanced over the documents, her mind starting to piece together what Jake was saying. "Are you suggesting we use the very system Musk is manipulating against him?" Jake's grin widened. "Exactly. We go after the core of the system. We expose the way these huge corporations, Musk's included, are bending the law. And if we can make the system work for us instead of them, we can create an entirely new narrative, one that can't be ignored." Rachel leaned back, her fingers tapping the table. She had spent her career working within the system, trying to make sense of its complex structures, interpreting the rules in ways that made sense to her clients. But now, Jake was suggesting something more radical, to turn the system on its head, to challenge not just the actions of one individual or one corporation, but the entire legal infrastructure that governed innovation. She hesitated. This would be dangerous, Jake. We're talking about going up against Musk, yes, but also against the entire legal establishment. They're not going to sit idly by and watch us tear everything down. Jake's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and resolve. I'm not asking you to tear everything down, Rachel. I'm asking you to rebuild it. There's a gap we can exploit to change the way patents work. Musk has been operating under the assumption that the system is invincible, but that's exactly where he's wrong. Rachel took a deep breath. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The safe, conventional path had led her to defeat. But this was different. This was a chance to fight for something bigger, to fight not just for her career, but for the future of innovation itself. She looked up at Jake, her eyes narrowing with determination. All right, let's do it. Over the next several days, Rachel and Jake worked tirelessly, meeting late into the evenings, poring over legal documents, case histories, and the fine print of the patent system. They were creating a strategy that could, if executed correctly, expose the cracks in the legal infrastructure and put Musk on the defensive. As they worked, Rachel found herself re-energized. The constant hum of strategy, the intricate weaving of legal precedents, and the possibility of turning the tide against Musk's empire reignited something in her that she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It was still a long shot, but it was a shot worth taking. Meanwhile, Elon Musk was fully immersed in his next big project. He was overseeing developments for his new renewable energy venture, making waves with his vision of transforming the global energy market. Musk had always thrived on thinking ahead, pushing boundaries, rewriting the rules of industries. But as he navigated his daily routines, there was something lurking in the back of his mind. Rachel Donovan. He hadn't forgotten about her. Though the legal battle had ended in his favor, something about the way she had presented her arguments, the way she had fought for her cause, had stuck with him. She wasn't just another lawyer. She had a fire, a drive that reminded him of his own path when he first started. But now, with the case behind him, Musk knew it was time to move forward. The patent win was just a stepping stone in a much larger game. He was already thinking about how to shift the conversation from lawsuits to innovation, how to lead the charge in creating the next frontier of technology unencumbered by legal battles. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Donovan wasn't finished with him. She was smart, determined, and perhaps most dangerous of all, she was unpredictable. Back in her office, Rachel stared at her computer screen, reviewing the final pieces of the strategy she and Jake had put together. There was a lot at stake, more than just the outcome of a single case. If this worked, if they could successfully challenge the legal structure that Musk had manipulated, they would change everything. They would change the future of innovation, and Rachel would have the chance to redeem herself, to fight for what was right. But she knew that it wouldn't be easy. Musk wasn't the type to back down quietly. He would fight back, and he would fight hard. Rachel took one last look at the documents on her desk, then closed her laptop. She was ready. It was time to make her move. Rachel Donovan stood at the window of her office, gazing out over the city as the weight of the decision settled on her shoulders. The strategy she and Jake had devised was radical, bold, and potentially game-changing. But it was also risky. She could already hear the voices of doubt in her mind, warning her about the consequences of challenging the system on such a massive scale. But as she watched the city below, bustling with life and energy, she knew she couldn't back down now. Musk had already manipulated the system for his own gain. If she didn't act, the future of innovation, the very essence of intellectual property, would be controlled by a few powerful individuals who could afford to play the game. She wasn't about to let that happen. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her back to reality. She picked it up, seeing Jake's name on the screen. "We need to move fast. I've got the first piece of the puzzle, something that will make Musk's victory seem like a hollow one. Call me when you get this." Rachel's fingers hovered over the phone for a moment. She knew the risks. She knew the stakes. But there was no turning back. She hit reply and immediately called Jake back. Jake answered on the first ring. "Rachel, I've got it." Rachel leaned forward, the tension palpable. Got what? I've been looking through Musk's most recent patents, his renewable energy stuff. The tech looks impressive, sure. But here's the thing. It's not as revolutionary as he's making it out to be. He's essentially repurposing existing designs, adding minor tweaks and patenting them as though they're brand new. Rachel's eyes widened. Are you saying his patents are fraudulent? Jake's voice dropped. Not exactly fraudulent, but close. There's a gray area, a space where what he's claiming is groundbreaking technology is actually just a reworking of existing solutions. If we can prove that his patents aren't as original as they seem, we can undermine his entire empire. Rachel took a deep breath. This was huge. If they could expose Musk's patents as little more than recycled ideas, it would take away the foundation of his claims. It would call into question everything he had built, not just in the renewable energy space, but in every area of technology where he had staked his claim. How do we prove that? She asked, her mind already racing through possible legal routes. I've already started the process, Jake said, his voice full of quiet excitement. I'm pulling together a team of experts to conduct a full analysis. We'll compare Musk's patents to existing patents and public knowledge. Once we find the similarities, we'll have our case. Rachel nodded, a sense of urgency creeping into her chest. This is our shot, Jake. We need to be prepared. If we can expose Musk's entire strategy as a facade, we'll have the leverage we need to make real change. Jake paused for a moment, then added, There's another thing. Once we go public with this, Musk will do everything in his power to bury it. He'll fight back hard. Are you ready for that? Rachel took a deep breath. The battle was far from over, but she felt a spark of resolve deep inside. I've never been more ready. Over the next few weeks, Rachel, Jake, and their growing team worked around the clock. They pored over Musk's patents, dissecting each one with meticulous detail, comparing them to existing technology and public domain ideas. It was a daunting task, but every breakthrough brought them closer to exposing the cracks in Musk's empire. They were careful, deliberate. If they were going to bring down a titan like Musk, they needed to be certain of their findings. As the days passed, Rachel's focus grew sharper. She knew that they were walking a fine line. If Musk found out what they were doing, he would retaliate. The world would be watching closely. If they exposed Musk's patents as fraudulent, it could set off a chain reaction, not just in the courts but in the court of public opinion. The impact would be far-reaching. But Rachel wasn't thinking about the consequences anymore. She was thinking about the future, the kind of future she wanted to help shape. She knew the system could be better. It could be more transparent, more fair. And if she had to take down a giant to do that, so be it. Meanwhile, Elon Musk continued his work, seemingly unfazed by the shadow of Rachel's challenge. He had his own concerns to manage. The renewable energy project was progressing, but there were whispers in the business world about the legitimacy of some of his patents. Musk ignored the rumors at first. After all, patents were a normal part of the game. But over time, those whispers began to grow louder. He could feel the heat turning up, especially when his legal team came to him with news that Rachel Donovan had been investigating his intellectual property. Musk, we've been tracking her movements. She's got a team of experts digging into your patents. They're trying to expose flaws in the technology, his lead counsel, Bill Harper, informed him one morning. Musk leaned back in his chair, the news registering with a calm he hadn't expected. Let her try. If she wants to play that game, fine. But we'll play it better. Harper wasn't as confident. Musk, she's not like the other lawyers. She's smart. And if she's digging into your patents, it's only a matter of time before she finds something we missed. Musk stood up, pacing around his office, his mind already working through the possibilities. He knew that he couldn't ignore this challenge. Donovan wasn't someone who would back down, and the stakes were high. But he had built his empire on thinking ahead, and he wasn't about to let one woman's legal crusade take him down. I'll handle it, Musk said, his voice cool and calculating. In the meantime, continue to monitor her progress. I want to know every move she makes. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel's team continued to dig deeper, their findings starting to paint a damning picture. They had uncovered several key patents where Musk's so-called innovative designs were eerily similar to public domain ideas. In one case, An energy storage technology Musk had patented was almost identical to a design published in a research paper 5 years earlier. The case for exposure was becoming stronger with each passing day. But just as Rachel was preparing to go public with their findings, she received a message that sent a chill through her. It was from a trusted contact at her firm, alerting her that Musk had hired a high-powered PR team to discredit her and her team before they could make their move. The legal battle was about to escalate, and it was going to be ugly. Rachel stared at the message, her mind spinning. She knew that the fight was about to get even more intense. But now, she was more determined than ever. Musk had underestimated her before. He wouldn't make that mistake again. The morning after receiving the ominous message about Musk's PR team, Rachel Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was entering a new phase. Things were about to get personal. She had been preparing for a legal showdown, but now, with Musk's massive PR machine gearing up to attack her and her team, the stakes had shifted from a courtroom drama to a full-fledged media war. She knew the public eye was going to be her biggest challenge yet. She sat at her desk, reviewing the evidence they had compiled on Musk's patents. There were moments when it felt like the weight of the world was resting on her shoulders, but today, she felt a strange calm. For weeks, she had been immersed in this fight, researching, strategizing, consulting with experts. She'd spent countless hours putting together a case that could shatter Musk's empire. But now that they were on the brink of making it public, Rachel knew there was no turning back. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Jake. "Rachel, we need to move fast. Musk's PR team is already spreading rumors about us. They're trying to paint us as opportunistic lawyers, trying to take down an innovator for personal gain. We can't let that narrative stick." Rachel took a deep breath and stared out the window. The city below seemed so calm, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of events that were unfolding. But she knew Jake was right. If they didn't act now, the battle would be lost before it even began. "I know. I'll be at the office in 30 minutes. Let's do this." When Rachel arrived at their makeshift war room, Jake was already there, pacing in front of a whiteboard filled with notes and diagrams. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but Rachel could see the spark in Jake's eyes. He was ready. "You've seen the news?" Jake asked, his voice tight with urgency. "I've seen it. Musk's PR machine is already working overtime," Rachel replied, rolling up her sleeves. "But we've got something they don't. The truth." Jake gave her a half-smile. "Exactly. But we need to get ahead of them. If we don't, they'll control the narrative. They'll make us look like we're the villains." Rachel turned to the whiteboard, taking in the sprawling mess of information. "I don't care what Musk's team says. We have the facts. We have the proof. We just need to get it in front of the right people before his team spins it into something else." She quickly got to work, reviewing their press release draft, making sure it was airtight. They needed a strategy that would counteract the media frenzy Musk was about to unleash. This wasn't just about the legal case anymore. It was about winning the battle for public opinion. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's team was already preparing their counteroffensive. They had hired one of the best PR firms in the world, a team known for its ability to shift narratives and control the media. Musk's empire had been built on innovation and cutting-edge technology, and his public persona was that of a visionary. A few well-placed stories, a couple of strategically timed interviews, and he could make Rachel and her team look like opportunistic opportunists trying to tear down an icon. Musk sat in his sleek, minimalist office, meeting with his PR team. He wasn't one to get bogged down in media battles. He preferred to focus on his companies, his projects, his goals. But he knew that this was different. Rachel Donovan had proven herself a formidable opponent in the courtroom, and now, she was about to challenge him in the court of public opinion. He couldn't afford to let that happen. "Rachel Donovan," Musk said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "She thinks she can take me down, huh?" His PR chief, Vanessa, nodded. "Yes, Mr. Musk. She's got a solid case on her hands, but we can spin it. We've got the right channels. We can paint her as just another lawyer trying to take down a successful entrepreneur for personal gain." Musk's lips curled into a thin smile. "That's not a story. That's a narrative. Make sure it works. Get it to the right people. Make it clear that I'm not just some businessman. I'm changing the world." And I'm not going to let one lawyer stop that. Back at Rachel's office, the pressure was mounting. Her team had finalized their findings. Musk's patents were rife with questionable claims, ideas that had been recycled and repurposed from earlier work. They had their evidence, their smoking gun. But now, they needed to get the word out before Musk's PR team had the chance to twist the narrative in their favor. Rachel leaned forward, scanning the final press release one last time. She knew the timing had to be perfect. Any delay, any hesitation, and Musk's team would seize control of the conversation. They had to act now. "We're ready," Jake said, breaking the silence. He looked up from his computer, his expression grim but focused. "The press release is good to go. All we need is a push." Rachel's pulse quickened. She picked up her phone and dialed the number of her most trusted media contact, a journalist named Sarah Lawson who had been covering tech and business for years. Sarah had always been an ally, someone who believed in fair reporting and the truth. "Sarah, it's Rachel. We've got a story that the world needs to hear, but we need it out now. Musk's team is already on the offensive, and we can't let them take control of this." Sarah's voice came through the phone, calm and reassuring. "I'm listening, Rachel. What have you got?" Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We've got evidence that Musk's patents aren't as original as he's making them out to be. We've done the research, and we're ready to prove it. The truth is, Musk has been gaming the system, and it's time people knew." There was a pause on the line before Sarah spoke again. "Send me everything. I'll get the story ready for tomorrow. But you need to brace yourself. This is going to be huge." Rachel nodded, her heart racing. This was it, the moment of truth. Later that night, as the press release was sent to media outlets across the globe, Rachel sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. She knew the storm was coming. Musk would retaliate. His team would try to spin the story, smear her name, and discredit everything she had worked for. But she was ready. The truth was on their side, and she was about to take the fight to Musk in a way he had never expected. The morning after Rachel and Jake's press release went live, the media storm hit. The story about Musk's questionable patents spread like wildfire, dominating news cycles, social media feeds, and tech forums. Rachel had known that this would be a pivotal moment, but the sheer volume of attention was staggering. She had expected some backlash, but she hadn't anticipated just how quickly Musk's empire would fight back. The headline screamed, "Is Elon Musk's empire built on deceptive patents?" Rachel Donovan exposes Musk's intellectual property secrets, Musk's revolutionary technologies. How much is really his? Rachel sat at her desk, scrolling through the flood of articles, opinions, and rebuttals. Some of the media outlets were quick to corroborate the story, citing their own experts and analysts who supported the findings in Rachel's press release. Others, however, were already parroting Musk's PR talking points, framing the issue as a baseless attack from a jealous lawyer seeking to discredit a tech visionary. It was the opening salvo in what was going to be a long, hard battle. Rachel could feel the tension building in the air, both from the media's relentless scrutiny and the impending counterattack from Musk. She wasn't naive enough to think this was going to be easy. Musk wasn't going to let his legacy be threatened by a few legal challenges and some bad press. But she also knew that she had forced his hand. Musk was now in the public eye, on the defensive, and that, in itself, was a victory. Rachel's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Sarah Lawson, the journalist she had reached out to the night before. "Rachel, I've got sources confirming the validity of your claims. Musk's patents are coming under increasing scrutiny from the legal community. But be warned, his team is already spinning their counter-narrative. They're saying that you've misrepresented the facts and are trying to undermine innovation itself." Rachel clenched her jaw. It was exactly what she had expected. Musk's PR team would stop at nothing to paint her as the villain. They had already started planting the seeds of doubt. "Thanks, Sarah. Keep pushing the facts. We've got the truth on our side." Meanwhile, in a sleek, glass-walled office in one of Musk's many headquarters, Elon Musk sat in front of a team of public relations experts, his arms folded across his chest. He looked unamused as they briefed him on the media fallout. "The media's turning against us, Musk," said Vanessa, the PR chief. "Donovan's release is gaining traction. We've got tech experts who are agreeing with her conclusions. It's not just an attack on your patents, It's an attack on the very idea of innovation itself. She's making it look like you're a fraud. Musk leaned back in his chair, his gaze focused but unfazed. I've dealt with worse. This is just another PR skirmish. We'll fight back with the same strategy, control the narrative. We have the resources. We can make her look like just another bitter lawyer trying to ruin my reputation. Vanessa nodded. We've already lined up a series of interviews with major outlets. We'll get you in front of the press soon to tell your side of the story. If we act fast, we can discredit Donovan before she gains too much traction. But Musk wasn't so sure. It's not just Donovan anymore. The media is catching on to the fact that there might be something more here. We need to take control, and I mean quickly. I don't want this to spiral into something bigger. Back in Rachel's office, the pressure was mounting. As the day wore on, more and more news outlets were picking up the story. Musk's team had started firing back, planting stories about Rachel's alleged personal motivations, claims that she was trying to bring down a man who had revolutionized industries. They portrayed her as someone who was out for fame and personal gain, rather than a lawyer simply doing her job. Rachel read through one of the rebuttal articles. The insinuations about her were frustrating, but she knew they were expected. The public perception of her was now at risk. If she didn't act quickly, Musk's PR machine would successfully twist the narrative to his advantage. Jake, we need to get ahead of this, she said, pacing around her office. They're already framing me as the villain. We can't let that happen. Jake, who had been reviewing the news coverage, looked up at her. I know, but we've got to focus on the facts. Let the media spin whatever they want, but we need to keep pushing the truth. Musk's patents are flawed, and we have the proof. Rachel nodded, but the weight of the situation was beginning to settle in. The fight had gone from legal to personal. Musk wasn't just a businessman she was going up against. He was an icon, a symbol of Silicon Valley success. People had been conditioned to believe in his brilliance. Turning public opinion would be the hardest battle of all. As the evening approached, Rachel met with her team to discuss their next move. They had to find a way to push back against Musk's counter-narrative and keep the focus on the evidence. If they didn't, they risked losing everything. Jake laid out a plan. We'll start by pushing for a more thorough investigation. The media might be listening to Musk's PR team right now, but we need to create pressure from within the legal and tech communities. We need influencers, thought leaders, and credible experts to back us up. If we can get enough people to speak out about the flaws in Musk's patents, we'll turn the tide. Rachel agreed. They couldn't win this battle with headlines alone. They needed to shift the conversation back to the facts, what Musk had claimed, what he had patented, and how much of it was truly innovative. We need experts in intellectual property to validate our findings, Rachel said, thinking aloud. We need independent voices to verify the flaws. If we can get that, we'll have the ammunition we need to fight back. Jake nodded. I've already reached out to a few of the top experts in IP law. I'll keep working on it. You focus on handling the media. We need to get the story out there, not just in legal circles but in the public eye too. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and press interviews. Rachel's team worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence and connecting with experts who were willing to back up their claims. Slowly but surely, the narrative began to shift. Musk's PR campaign was strong, but Rachel's team had one advantage that Musk couldn't control: the truth. Every time they presented new evidence, every time an expert added their voice to the conversation, it made Musk's empire look more vulnerable. In the background, Musk watched as his public image began to take a hit. His patents were under fire, and the media was beginning to question whether he was the visionary he had always claimed to be. The tide was turning, but it wasn't over yet. Rachel Donovan sat alone in her office late one evening, the city lights flickering outside her window. The battle had raged on for weeks, but now it was at a boiling point. The momentum was shifting, slowly but surely, towards her side. The media had picked up on the growing whispers of doubt surrounding Elon Musk's patents. Analysts, legal experts, and even some of Musk's former allies were beginning to speak out. It was the breakthrough she'd been waiting for. But even as she felt the excitement of victory on the horizon, a lingering sense of unease gnawed at her. Elon Musk wasn't the type of man who would simply fade into the background. He was a fighter, a visionary who had built an empire from nothing. He was going to strike back hard. Rachel had known it wouldn't be easy, but she also understood that if they were going to win this, they needed more than just public opinion. They needed to bring the fight into the courtroom, where everything would come down to the facts. She had the evidence. She had the experts. But the real test was yet to come. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Jake. "We've got an update. One of Musk's former engineers just came forward. He's willing to testify under oath that Musk has been taking credit for work that wasn't his. He's got documents, too." Rachel's heart raced. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. If they could get the former engineer to testify and present those documents, it would be the smoking gun they needed to prove that Musk's patents weren't just flawed, they were fraudulent. "Is he willing to go public?" Rachel asked, leaning forward in her chair. Jake's voice was tight with excitement. "He's on board. But there's one catch. He wants full immunity for his testimony. No backlash, no legal action from Musk's side." Rachel exhaled slowly. It was a huge ask, but it could be the key to winning the case. "Get him in touch with our legal team. We'll figure it out. This could be our game changer." Meanwhile, in the sleek, minimalist offices of Tesla, Elon Musk sat with his legal team, going over the latest developments. He had been monitoring Rachel's every move, and the pressure was beginning to take its toll. The media, once solidly in his corner, was now questioning everything, from his patents to his methods. It was the first time in years that he felt his empire was under threat, and he wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. "Rachel Donovan is pushing us into a corner," Musk said, his voice low and controlled. "She's got too many people backing her now, too much media attention. If we don't act fast, this could spiral out of control." His lead attorney, Bill Harper, nodded gravely. "We've already started spinning the story, but it's not enough. We need to hit her harder, hit her where it hurts. And if this engineer testifies, we need to discredit him before he even gets a chance to speak," Musk interrupted. "Is there any way to make him back down?" Harper hesitated, then spoke carefully. "We might be able to get him to reconsider if we can prove he has something to hide. His past with Tesla isn't exactly spotless." Musk's eyes gleamed. "Then we'll find something. We can't let this engineer's testimony see the light of day. He's a loose end, and if he testifies, it'll unravel everything." As Rachel and Jake worked tirelessly to prepare for the court battle, the pressure from all sides intensified. They knew that the stakes had never been higher. If they could secure the former engineer's testimony, they could finally bring down Musk's empire. But if they lost this, if the engineer backed out or Musk's team managed to discredit him, everything they had worked for would come crashing down. Rachel took a deep breath as she sat in a meeting with her team, discussing their next steps. "We need to stay focused. We can't let Musk's tactics distract us. If we do this right, we'll have the proof we need to expose him once and for all." Jake nodded, glancing at the rest of the team. "We've come too far to back down now. This is our chance to make a real difference. We need to make sure we're prepared for every angle. The moment this engineer testifies, it's going to change everything." Rachel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Sarah Lawson, the journalist who had been covering the case from the beginning. "Rachel, I just got off the phone with a source. Musk is about to launch a major PR campaign, attacking your credibility and trying to paint you as someone with a personal vendetta against him. He's going to make this personal. Be ready." Rachel's pulse quickened. Of course he was going to make it personal. It was Musk's only play now. Attack her, make her the villain, and distract from the facts. But Rachel wasn't about to let that happen. She had the truth on her side, and she wasn't backing down. The next few days were a blur of court motions, legal paperwork, and mounting media attention. The stakes were higher than ever, and both sides were preparing for the ultimate showdown. As Rachel walked into the courtroom on the day of the hearing, she could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. The moment had arrived. Musk's team had made their first move, discrediting the former engineer with insinuations of personal greed and misconduct. But Rachel was undeterred. She had the evidence, and she was prepared to fight for it. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Rachel and Jake sat at the prosecution table, their minds focused, their eyes sharp. They knew that Musk's legal team would pull every trick in the book to defend him. But Rachel was ready. Her turn to speak came, and she stood, looking out over the room. The press was watching closely. The public was waiting to see what would happen next. And Rachel Donovan had one goal: to make sure the truth won out. She began her statement, detailing the evidence they had uncovered, explaining how Musk's patents were built on the backs of others' work, and how he had manipulated the system for his own gain. She spoke with conviction, her words clear and forceful. There was no room for doubt. The courtroom went silent. Musk's empire was under fire. This was the beginning of the end. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The final chapter of this relentless legal battle had arrived. Rachel Donovan stood at the front, facing a judge who would determine the fate of Elon Musk's patents and, in a larger sense, his empire. For the first time in her career, the stakes felt more personal than legal. She wasn't just defending the truth anymore. She was fighting for justice. Musk's team had thrown every possible tactic at her over the past few weeks. They had attacked her integrity, questioned her motivations, and tried to cast doubt on the validity of the evidence. But Rachel was resolute. She had no intention of letting a billionaire with a massive PR machine overshadow the truth. Every shred of evidence they had painstakingly uncovered was ready to be presented, and she was prepared to lay it all out, no matter what Musk threw at her. As the judge prepared to give his ruling, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The press gallery was filled with reporters eager to capture the final moments of what had become a legal and media circus. Cameras clicked as journalists frantically scribbled their last notes. Outside, the public was watching intently, knowing that whatever decision was made would have consequences far beyond the courtroom. Rachel exchanged a glance with Jake. Her trusted ally had been with her through every step of this battle. They had weathered the storms together, faced down the onslaught of media attacks, dealt with threats and pressure from Musk's team. But now, it was all down to this final moment. The judge's voice broke the silence, cutting through the tension. After reviewing the evidence presented in this case, the testimonies provided by both parties, and the relevant legal precedents, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Rachel Donovan, and her legal team, the judge declared, his voice steady but final. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't over yet, but this was the moment she had worked for. It was a huge victory. Her team had proved that Elon Musk's patents had been built on fraudulent claims, that his empire was not built solely on innovation, but on the exploitation of ideas that were not his own. The case was a monumental blow to Musk's intellectual property portfolio and potentially to his reputation. Musk, seated at his table, had no reaction. His stoic expression barely flickered, but Rachel could see the weight of defeat settling over him. For a man who had become synonymous with success and innovation, this was a loss unlike any other. The media had already begun reporting on the ruling, and social media was ablaze with reactions. People from all corners of the globe had been following this case. Now, it was out in the open. Elon Musk had been exposed for what he truly was, a man whose genius was built on the work of others. As the courtroom emptied, Rachel allowed herself a moment to breathe. The years of hard work, the sleepless nights, the personal sacrifices, it had all paid off. They had won. But the battle wasn't truly over. The victory was just the beginning. Musk's legal team would undoubtedly appeal the decision, and the media frenzy would continue. But Rachel had proven something far more important, that even the most powerful can be held accountable, and that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way to the surface. She looked over at Jake, a slight smile playing on her lips. "We did it." Jake returned the smile, but there was a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "It's not over yet. We've got to stay focused. Musk will fight back, and we need to be ready for that." Rachel nodded, already thinking ahead. This was the beginning of a much larger movement, one that would shake the foundations of the tech industry, one that would challenge the very concept of what it meant to be an innovator. If Musk had built his empire on deception, what else was out there, hiding in plain sight? That night, as Rachel sat at her desk reviewing the court's ruling, she received a final message from Sarah Lawson, the journalist who had been covering the case from the start. "Rachel, I wanted to let you know that the public reaction to the verdict is unlike anything I've ever seen. People are calling this a game changer for tech, for intellectual property law, for accountability in general. You've not only brought down Musk's patents, you've sparked a conversation about what it means to truly innovate. This is just the beginning. Rachel sat back in her chair, a sense of quiet pride filling her. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about exposing the truth. The fight had been long, it had been grueling, but Rachel had emerged victorious. She had proved that no one, not even the so-called geniuses of Silicon Valley, was above the law. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that the world could be a little bit fairer, a little more just. In the coming weeks, Musk's team would attempt to mount an appeal, but it was clear that the public had already made up its mind. The damage to Musk's brand was done. The media would continue to scrutinize his actions, and there was little he could do to stop it. His empire, once seen as untouchable, had now been tarnished by scandal. But for Rachel, that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something bigger. As Rachel looked out the window of her office, the city sprawling before her, she couldn't help but think of the countless others who had been overlooked, silenced, or ignored by the powerful elite. There were more stories to uncover, more injustices to fight against. She had won this battle, but the war for truth, for justice, was far from over. She wasn't done yet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?